to this meeting of the Complaints and Conduct Committee. I do apologise for the 4-minute delay, technology issues, but we're all live now. So let's kick this off. Firstly, are there any apologies, Colette?
Apologies. There's no apologies on this occasion, Chair.
Okay, fabulous. And are there any declarations of interest or any connections that anybody needs to make? No, very good. Is there any other business that anybody needs to declare at this stage? Nothing rising, nothing that's been notified. Members content to take items 11 through 13 in private?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, very good. Right, moving swiftly on to the minutes and actions from the previous meeting. So first, there's a few minutes for us to approve. So the first one is the minute from the meeting held on the 1st of March 2023. Are members content that that's an accurate record of the meeting? Yeah. And we've got the public minute of the private meeting also held on the 1st of March for approval as well. Are members happy to approve? Very good. Right, and now the rolling action log and matters arising. So there's quite a few things on the action log, and I think quite a few of them are proposed for closing, which is good. So I would suggest that we run through them in the chronological order that they are in our pack, and we just without going too much into the detail, because obviously we've all read the papers, if we just agree, see if we're happy to close them off. But as I say, I think there's quite a few. So the first one, which was from it's from the last meeting held 1st of March, item number 1, around organizational learning was proposed for closing because we do have an agenda item at agenda item 9 that closes that off. Members content to close? I think we are.
Katerina, sorry, I'm
Yeah.
looking at the one, if I may interject rather than put my hand up on this.
Of course.
I was, if I'm being honest, I was looking for a bit more.
Okay.
So I don't know if, and now that I've said that out loud, if we close this, we can then have the dialogue, because one of my other worries is we've got an awful lot that are not closed from last year. So I'm worried about delays in some. So yes, sorry, content to close, but if I can raise new issues later on in the agenda. Sorry, thank you.
No, thank you very much, Fiona. I think this would have been, with some of them, I totally echo your sentiment. With some of them, it's also my intention to close some of the old ones, which feel like maybe we could reframe some of them, but then open new ones. So absolutely, I'm really, really happy with that proposal. Are members content with that? Katrina, I saw you had your hand up. Was it a similar observation?
Yes, I mean, usually when there's something on the rolling action log that actually has still to be discussed later on in the meeting, it feels like a good idea to wait till the discussion. But I absolutely take the point that it doesn't stop the discussion happening if we close this item, because it has been delivered effectively. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you. So then we have got the next one, which is also from the last meeting, that's action 2. So that's around the update on which complaints are upheld versus which ones are not upheld. So we have been given some information as part of the update for this action, and I believe we now also have this. Do we have this in our report now as well?
Yes, we do.
I believe we do.
We do, yes.
Yeah, so do members feel that that satisfies this action? And we're happy to close this one, particularly considering that we will have this data in the report going forward. Yeah.
Yes, I think particularly given our last passage of conversation, Katerina, I think, yes, content, thanks.
Very good. Thank you. We had another action here around the, so that's again from last meeting, action number 3, which was around which procedures are generating the allegations in relation to irregularity in procedures and what Police Scotland are doing within the space. And so again, we do have an update here. It seems like quite a number of allegations within the subcategory were dip sampled. I mean, 760 is quite a big dip sample. And I think some of the information as provided here is so we have some information. Do you remember, Svi, that satisfies that particular one? I personally have to say that it feels that I can't necessarily tie this, what's been provided here, to actually procedures. Grant, I see you've got a view.
Yes, I think I raised this because other category had an awful lot in it, and then it really has benefited from a bit of sub-analysis. And if the sub-analysis could be continued going forward, we probably wouldn't have quite as many questions as to what's in other. I know that sounds a rather bizarre way of putting it, but if other could be subdivided going forward into the appropriate categories, I think that would be helpful.
Is that something that we can do going forward then, on a more regular basis? Is that the thrust of your suggestion, Grant?
Yes, basically, because what's given here about the dip sampling, it divides it into categories to some extent, and I think whether these are the right categories to go forward, I'm not sure, and I think that welcome views from ACC Spears on that, but I think basically some form of sub-analysis rather than this broad category of other, which had so many case numbers in it, would be extremely helpful for us to make some regular progress rather than keep asking the question.
Thank you, Grant. I'll bring ACC Spears in a second. I suppose what's going through my head is if in order to get this analysis, a dip sampling exercise was required, then the question is, why is it that it's all batched as other? Is there functionality to break it down further? So is it just that there is more underlying data, but we're not seeing that? Or is it just this is the lowest level in the system to which it can go, to at which stage we kind of have to ask the question, is it going to be a dip sampling exercise constantly, or what's the Fiona? You'd like to come in?
I think you were probably, sorry to interject, Catherine. I think we need to, in order to have assurance that there's organisational learning, we need to know and understand that. So Police Scotland need to know and understand, and if Police Scotland do know and understand, then they need to report it to us in a way, Alan, that we can understand and get assurance. If the system doesn't allow that level of analysis, then I think we need to have a dialogue about how are we going, and as we go forwards, how are we going to get that system that supports the analysis, evaluation of the complaint, the lessons learned, and then completing the circle, evidence that the lessons learned have actually been put in place and they've been effective. So I think we do need that whole system approach, ideally on using technology.
Thank you, Fiona. Alan, would you like to come in?
Yeah. You recall firstly from the previous couple of meetings I've spoken about the upgrades that we await to the Centurion system. So we're using the same system in Scotland that's used across the UK. We need 2 updates to our system that would allow us to present, I think, a more informative organisational learning paper. So I'm probably jumping in early. We're constrained in what we can produce just now because of where the system is at. The first upgrade is in August, and the upgrade that we'll get is into a much better place around qualitative data is scheduled for October. And I think in the second half of the year, we will be able to produce an awful lot more qualitative data. I think we can take away to the observation around these other complaints. What I would say is these are probably at the very low end of complaints, and irregularity and procedure is a really broad theme. I think we can do what you're asking, but I would just caveat to suggest that it's probably quite a significant amount of work for us to do. The very fact that we've had to carry out a dip sampling exercise to discharge this action potentially it kind of tells you that the system doesn't automatically record the complaints in a way in which you would like to see that. So I would like to take that away and just explore how we could present data on a regular basis in and around irregularity in procedures or quality of service type complaints in a slightly more informative way. I just suspect it could be quite a time consuming piece of work, but I'm happy to explore that with Colleen, who leads on this.
Thank you very much for that. Fiona, please.
So I think listening to what Alan's saying is really helpful, and I'm wondering whether or not, and it's up to the team to come back to us and think about it, whether we could actually have an informal session on this, because I think I'm hearing you say, Alan, if it's about irregularity in procedure, it could be incredibly minor. Now, I'm not saying that's not important, but it could just be incredibly minor. So there's been something, it's of absolutely no consequence, but it's a legitimate complaint to irregularity of procedure that is much more material, and it's clearly the material piece that we're interested in. So
again, just to give you some reassurance, Fiona, these types of complaints are the ones that are resolved quite quickly by frontline resolution, because it's explanation and a little bit more detail. So I'm not trivialising the nature of the complaint, but they are easily resolved, and they're in that space, so they'd be quickly resolved, and they are at the lower end. But I'm happy to explore with the team just how we can present some of that data going forward. And
even maybe a discussion document telling us that, you're giving us that range of in practical terms what it is, what impact it has. We can loop it into the dip sampling, because some of that, and perks review as well, so that we can bring that all together as a package.
Thank you for that. Grant, please.
Thanks, Katrina. I've got a similar view to the one just expressed by Fiona. If we've got a situation where they are relatively minor breaches of SOPs, I know that there's quite a lot of work going on behind the scenes to streamline the SOPs. And if we can actually somehow or other follow through from these sort of illustrations of complaints through to actually finding a simpler way that the officers concerned can deal with things in a straightforward manner by simplifying the SOPs, then I think we could actually perhaps make some genuine progress with this without adding to the workload of Police Scotland and spending a lot of time analysing the smaller, lower value items so they can concentrate on the other things. But if this could be sort of, as Fiona suggests, some form of discussion on it to find a practical way forward, I would be also very much in support of that.
Thank you very much for that, Grant. I see, Alan, you want to come in again, but I also saw Katrina nodding, so I'm going to bring Katrina in, please.
Yes, I just don't think any of us would want to unnecessarily add to your burden of work, to no great purpose. I'm just wondering, reading through the piece that is in this paper, whether it's a case of possibly looking at how you theme this particular category, and maybe it's a question of remodeling how it's described so that it's a bit clearer what other is covering, without necessarily having to go to a lot of effort over a long period of time to keep kind of re-exploring it. I think it might just be a case of possibly just changing the way it's articulated, perhaps.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that, Katrina. I think some really, really, really helpful comments from colleagues just around that proportionality, because we do need to have the assurance, but it is about assurance on the things that really matter in the grand scheme of things, considering the challenges around resourcing, etc. So, Alan, did you want to come back in on this, or?
Yeah, just a really quick point, Katerina. I just wanted to give Grant a little bit of reassurance. This isn't a consequence of officers failing to comply with standard operating procedures. There may be tiny elements of that, but this is broader than that. And I think you're probably hitting the head the point I wanted to make. A big part of this is predicated on available resources, the demand that's getting placed on frontline officers, our ability to move from one incident to the next incident. And, you know, it's things like, you know, could we have given the reporter more of an update? You know, it's these types of things. So the availability of resources and versus the demand is a big factor in what is within this space. But I think we could probably, to Fiona's earlier point, have a discussion, whether at committee or out with the committee, to focus on some of this.
Thank you very much for that. So what I suggested is that I propose we close this particular action and we capture another action to explore this in a separate conversation. Okay. Fabulous. So then moving swiftly onto action 4 from last meeting, which was around the per quarter report. So we have received that in advance, and it has now also been included in our agenda at item 6. So propose that we close this action, because we will obviously cover that, and whatever comes out under item 6, we can record additionally if there's any further action. So happy to close. Okay. So on action 5 from last meeting, we have received a briefing on the approach to dip sampling. So I think that satisfies this particular action. So again, happy to close. I don't think we have dip sampling. Well, we don't have it on the agenda for this time round, but we have the briefing now, which means that we can digest, and I propose that we cover dip sampling at the next iteration of this committee. If members are content with that, because that, you know, it's not part of this, it's not part of our agenda for just now, and we do need the time to digest, etc., and potentially pick up with officers who've very kindly pulled this together to understand exactly around the proposals for this going forward. So I propose to close the action, and we will cover that. We will make a definitive decision at the next committee meeting that we come together as to what we're doing within that space. Okay. Fabulous. Right. Supposed to close. We've got an action 7, which is around the continuous integrity screening, and again, so this one is an interesting one. So there is no recommendation here on this particular agenda item. We do have a paper 8 around professional boundaries, which does cover some of the continuous integrity screening. I suggest that this one we keep open until we have covered this at today's meeting, because the way this is provide progress report on this work to the next committee meeting. So I suggest we discuss the professional boundaries paper and keep this action open for the time being, if members are content. Yeah, fabulous. Thank you. Then we have a few outstanding from the meeting held on the 15th of November. So one which relates to the early intervention activity and just the effectiveness of programme, how it's measured in terms of reducing complaints. We've had quite a few updates on this, and so we have been given some statistics around how it has worked, but the actual recommendation in this action is that further assessment is required over a longer period of time to really assess the effectiveness of this. I wonder if this is something that can be included in regular reporting as well, potentially. I would be tempted, as I say, I don't think keeping this action open in the form that it is now is necessarily particularly helpful. So the early intervention process is something that is obviously ongoing. I think the overall numbers are relatively small. I would propose to close this action as it is, see if we can include the data that's presented here into our regular reports, and come back to this in 6 months' time or in a year's time. I mean, I'm quite happy to be guided by Police Scotland here as to how early you think you can see what is the proposed time period to see if it does have an impact or not. I'm just looking at this. I'm seeing the numbers are relatively small compared to the number of complaints. So I doubt that we're going to get anything meaningful if it's a very short period of time. So I propose, as I say, to diarize that for a date in the future. I'd become comfortable with 6 or 9 months. Yeah. Okay, so we can maybe record it as a separate, propose to close this and record it as a separate action to include the reporting, include this into reporting, and then to diarize for a longer period of time. Okay, so from that same November meeting last year, we've got action number 4, which is around presentation of data. So that's big breakthrough. Very excited for some of our agenda items. For agenda item number 3, which is the grand reveal. So really grateful for the work that's happened within the space. New format has been provided for discussion. Again, what I would suggest, what feels to me as appropriate with this action, is that we probably close this, because again, I don't necessarily see a great degree of value in keeping this particular action open. But once we've obviously had a discussion around the new presentation of the report, it will absolutely continue to evolve over time. And if there is, but I think we almost need to run with this for a little bit, make some suggestions, but I propose to close this action the way it is. And then if we need something additional after we've had a chance to discuss and see how these reports work for us in practice, we can put in place something else. So propose to close. Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Professional standards. So from the same November meeting, action number 6, professional standards quarterly performance report. So provide information on work to understand the impact and totality of complaints in the workforce. This one is proposed as ongoing. And I think the conversation here was, if I remember correctly, this was something that, so looking at this holistically, so this, because complaints obviously impact both the person who's felt the need to make the complaint, but similarly, the officers and staff who are being complained about, there is an impact on them as well. And I think this was kind of the root of this action. And the latest update is that there's ongoing discussion with P&D colleagues to see if that's something that we can do. And I think, Fiona, this links very much into the people committee kind of side of things as well, doesn't it? There's a very strong linkage there around the well-being of officers and staff who are subject to complaints, because that can be quite a, there can be an impact, particularly if it's serious allegations and if the investigation, etc., takes a longer time, etc. So this is proposed ongoing here. I would just like to take views from colleagues as to whether you feel that to keep this action's current format open is helpful, or if we could reframe that, Fiona. Again, I'm thinking with the People's Committee's perspective. But Grant, you have a view?
Thank you. Just, I'm trying to find a way of avoiding double handling of things, and if it's being handled in terms of reporting to the People Committee that Fiona's comfortable with, I'd be perfectly happy that it be dealt with from there on in the People Committee.
Apologies for putting you on the spot, Fiona. Do you feel that is something that receives visibility at People Committee just now?
So I'm not sure that it necessarily receives particular visibility, but I think there's the whole system support that's available for officers if they've had a tricky shift, if they've had difficult a complaint against them, whether they're guilty or not, doesn't matter, they still need support. So I think that wider aspect is there, and I would be content that we were mainstreaming this in terms of assuming there is some kind of standard operating procedure that says make sure that you give staff support when there's been a complaint, a formal complaint or a complaint against them, then I'm content that the overall well-being of officers is receiving suitable attention at People Committee.
Thank you, Fiona. Alan, can you give us assurance that there is a process around the support of officers and staff subject to complaints?
No, there absolutely is, and I think it's no one size fits all. Everything is looked on its own individual merits, and we have processes and procedures in place about notification to officers and to staff, and in some occasions we take other measures that best support the staff based on the particular nature of the complaint, or it might be PERC investigation, which is not dissimilar.
Of course, thank you. That's really helpful. So thank you for this. On that basis, I suggest that we close this action rather than keep it ongoing. Okay, we've got action 9 also from the November committee as well. So this is provide an analysis around the desired impacts of recommendations. And here the latest update that we have is that we have already touched on this, I think, in our previous conversations, that the suggestion is that once everything has been implemented, that this is discharged by the established governance and reporting structure. So it's once Police Scotland have basically attested to that all recommendations have been closed. With, I think, embedded within that, well, I would have hoped that through the appropriate governance and reporting structures that there will be that attestation around we've closed off all the recommendations and it is having the desired impact. Again, I think, Grant, it goes towards what you mentioned around not double handling things.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel very little value is necessarily. I don't feel that it is necessary to keep this action running the way it is, because we're still out from being able to close off some of the recommendations because they're predicated on some of the systems changes being implemented, etc. So that's kind of the first element. And then secondly, there is a structure that is in place specifically around the actions coming out of this independent review. So I don't necessarily feel it, as I say, it gives us any enhanced visibility or assurance keeping this action open. So unless colleagues feel very strongly about this, I would propose to close it at this stage. Is there any opinions from our officers from the SPA side? Darren, are we breaching any requirements? I suppose I'm just seeking assurance from you, Darren, that we can close this one off, because Darren, what's your perspective?
Yeah, so up until now, governance structures in terms of the Angelini report have been focused on discharge of actions. I suspect it's probably why the discussion to take place around about longer term review of impact, but notwithstanding that, as you know, there are actions that remain outstanding both from SPA and Police Scotland. So content that to close this off. And I suppose that the question is as to whether or not that national approach does look at wider impact. Oh, sorry, I'm hearing something in the background. I think it will depend on whether or not that national structure does intend to go back and look at review of impact in future, failing which I guess there is a clear role for the committee, but it's a question that remains outstanding in terms of those national structures.
Okay, well, I thank you, Darren. This is really helpful. And what I propose is that we close this particular action off, and maybe we take an action for SPA for ourselves to go and ascertain that the national governance structures do have an element of impact assessment in an appropriate period of time. So maybe if we could take that action for ourselves, and then if there is an issue or anything, this can be discussed again at the next committee if we feel that there is a gap. but this, I just feels like this is something that we should be not necessarily discussing in this committee, but it should be kind of be, we should be lobbying, and we should be making sure through our business as usual good work that, the SP officers do every day in the background, that's kind of being captured there. If it presents an issue where we feel there's a gap, then we can discuss and give that public visibility. But I just, I think it makes sense at this stage for me to close this. Okay, thank you. Okay, so then from the meeting held the 31st of May 2022, so a year old, action number 6 is around taking forward a piece of work which will look at improving the 14-day deadline of submitting the paperwork to PERC. And the latest update on this one is that the review of the MOU remains ongoing. There has been an improvement. I can see that there are monthly meetings that are in place now. I mean, overall, I would suggest, and this is proposed for closure, I would be content to close it at this stage unless anybody's got very strong feelings about that. No? Okay, fabulous. Thank you. So we can close it as well. And then the joint audit SPA PERC update report. So this this is a little bit confusing here because it says in my papers proposed ongoing, but actually, I mean, we've had the final report now, so I would suggest that we close this one. I think it probably might just be a mistake in the papers, but so I would definitely propose to close it. Okay, good. Lots of nodding. Good. And then we have got Police Scotland Professional Standards Quarterly Report. So that's from the meeting held the 25th of November 2021. This is linked to organisational learning and how this is communicated throughout Police Scotland. The report will be added to the work plan to come forward on a 6-monthly basis. There's been lots of updates since then. So we've had a workshop that touched on organisational learning. I know it's on the agenda today again. And the latest update is, and I agree with that, is that this action seems to have been superseded by action 1 from our March meeting, which is agenda item 9, which we will discuss. And again, to Fiona's point, if we feel that we need to flush something out, we can flush it out when we're discussing that. So again, propose to close this one. Yeah? Excellent. Very good. And this means that this section of the committee will take substantially less time, famous last words, hopefully next time round. So well done, everybody. Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay. The next one item on my agenda is any 2.4 decisions since last meeting. I don't believe there have been any. Obviously, there has been some work that's been happening on the report, how the information is presented. So we'll discuss it. I think it's a nice segue into agenda item number 3, which is the Police Scotland Professional Standards Annual and Quarterly Performance Report. Alan, over to you for this one.
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. Morning, folks. So you'll see the report here at item 3 is presented in a little bit of a different format. And this is a piece of work that we've been doing with you as Chair and some of the officials at the SPA. So I would caveat what people see and would welcome feedback on how we're presenting the data here. We're trying to focus on the key elements. And I'll try not to say it again, but with an advanced version of our database, it will again allow us just to enhance how we present this data and maybe use some of the styles that you'll potentially see in other committees. So I'll take you through some headlines from the report, and in the midst of your feedback, certainly welcome any views around how we're presenting the data and should or could we do it a little bit differently. So this does incorporate the final quarter of the last financial year, but as you will see, there's a lot of year-to-date data within the report, which brings us to the year end. Just drawing 1 or 2 comments out from the executive summary. What we've seen over the course of the last year is that the variation in volume of complaints is incredibly marginal, and that's probably very reflective of the five-year average. So again, we've seen just a little bit more than 6,500 to 6,600 complaints within Police Scotland. And from there, our resolution FLR is 47% in that year. I guess I don't have a particular target in mind, because we have to, you know, if we can resolve more, great, because it means we're resolving and reaching resolution with an individual. But it's equally important that we're taking the right course of action in the handling of a complaint. So we continue to monitor that. But, you know, 47% versus 49%, I don't have an aspiration for that to be 70%. I just want to ensure that our complaint handling process is as efficient and as effective as it possibly can be. There's some data there in the report also which focuses on the complaint handling reviews, and that's those instances when a member of the public will go to PERC and ask for a little bit more in terms of their complaint. I think what has improved quite significantly, and it's predicated on the change to our complaint handling model, is that the volume of instances where we're handling the complaints to a reasonable standard is currently been 74%, and I think that's pleasing, in so much as it's a high percentage of those complaints are being endorsed positively by colleagues at PERC. You will also see quite a bit of detail in the report around PERC referrals. And again, over the course of the year, 325 referrals into PERC, which does show an increase of the previous year. So the demand on PERC continues to rise. I've kept separate from this, as you know, we have a statutory obligation to refer other matters like PAVA discharges, but we also refer Article 3, Article 5 matters to PERC, which is complaints of assault or excessive force. And I've kept them separate because those numbers are relatively high. And to be fair to PERC, a large proportion of those Article 3, Article 5 referrals aren't investigated by PERC. It is worth noting that a lot of referrals go to PERC, and a high proportion of them are not thereafter the subject of an investigation. And again, I don't pass comment on that other than make that observation. When we look very specifically at the reasons for referrals to PERC and the increases, there's two areas. It's armed policing, and I probably previously intimated it's at the point in any instance where we would point a firearm at a member of the public, then we would automatically refer that to PERC. So it's presentation of a firearm is largely what's driving that. And then secondly, it's serious injury in police custody has seen an increase. It's probably there's probably three elements to that, just to give you a clearer picture. Those referrals generally happen at the point of arrest, and not everybody wants to be arrested by the police. So there are a lot of instances where there's a use of force, there's a struggle, and individuals are looking to evade arrest. So at the point of arrest, we would consider that to be going into police custody, and that's where we would record that PERC referral. There's a smaller number of them are when they're in custody and they're under the control of officers in the charge bar. Those referrals are smaller, but we equally have a large number of referrals where it is self-inflicted injuries that a prisoner may punch a wall or headbutt a door or self-inflict an injury. These two would be referrals into PERC. And then there's some detail in the report also around misconduct. And you'll see again from the report that over the course of the year, 19 scheduled gross misconduct hearings, and quite a large proportion of those officers facing a hearing have resigned in advance of the hearing. And again, it's pretty much at the point of the hearing's going to take place tomorrow and I'll resign today. It takes us probably getting to the very final stages of conduct proceedings before their resignations take place. There's also some detailed, Chair, in the report around complaints upheld and not upheld. And from the action, you will see that was sitting about 6 or 7%. If we were to look at that from a slightly different perspective, and so frontline resolution is about resolving complaints to the satisfaction of a complainer, so it's slightly different. So when we push them to one side, we are probably the number of complaints that are upheld or not upheld, the percentages change a little bit, and it looks a little bit different. And then the final comment I was going to make from the report was on page 10. It probably doesn't reflect the level of activity that Katrina and the team have been undertaking in relation to continuous improvement, but there is some detail around the professionalism programme. I know we've got an agenda item later. There's some detail around training, our plans around the database, and some of the other work that we're doing in and around continuous integrity screening. I know you're probably keen to get an update. I can probably provide some detail in the private session that's more specific to where we are, and there's two reasons for that. One, I've yet to brief the Chief Constable in that level of detail, and secondly, we're doing this in collaboration with the National Police Chiefs Council, and there's a bit of an embargo through Home Office to present the data all at one time, but I can give you some form of assurance later in the meeting, and at that point I'm happy to pause and take myself or Kat will take any questions you have on the report.
Thank you very much for that. I will bring in colleagues in a second, but I really appreciate the format of the report, and thank you for kind of stepping us through some of things that you see as sort of the bigger ticket items, and the drawing out some of the more salient points as you see them. So I would like to open up to colleagues. Katrina, you would like to come in.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you. Really appreciated this report, and I appreciate the changes that have been made to the way it's presented. So thank you very much for that. Very clear to read. Actually, I've got one very niggly thing, because I'm quite a pedant, and I struggle with terms such as broadly. You know, as a researcher, etc. So on page 2, you've got use of these resources have broadly been assessed as proportionate and justified, and I'm wondering perhaps there's another way of describing what that means. Shall I just go through? Yeah. So I guess just a comment, page 5. I mean, you know, allegations by outcome not reasonable. There's still a proportion there that has been deemed not reasonable. So I guess I'm wondering about progress there. But the main thing I think you started to kind of allude to at the end there was on page 11, because I had a note about the continuous integrity screening and the review of sexual misconduct in domestic cases, and I just have questions: are these all on track, and when are we likely to see the outcome from this work? Thank you.
Thank you, Katrina. Alan, would you like to respond, or at this stage, or yeah, I think it's probably easier if we.
Yeah. So firstly, Katrina, apologies. I agree with you. I don't like language like broadly. I thought that word had been adjusted, so we will ensure that we're careful in the language. But I actually had in my original report a highlighted bit that I don't like those kind of vague phrases, so that will be adjusted. To your final point there, I'll probably just go back to the comments I made. With your indulgence, I would provide you with a more detailed update at the commencement of the update around conduct in the private session, and the update is informative, but it probably needs to be in that space at this point in time. I think, just again, for public reassurance, I will bring at a later date a report back to the public part of this meeting, but it's not at this stage.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Katrina. Does that conclude your questions at this stage? Yeah, okay, thank you. Fiona, please.
Thanks, Chair. I've got 4 questions. First of all, Alan, given the Chief's statement just last week or 2 weeks ago now on institutionalised discrimination, I wondered, a lot of this work has gone on before the Chief's statement, and I'm curious as to know if anything, particularly when you're looking perhaps at some of the domestic violence or other work complaints. I don't know how many are from people of colour, but if they're complaining that they weren't treated properly, I'm interested in your perspective here. Do any of the complaints need a relook? Is there going to be a different approach from the team? The second query I have, I'm interested in injury, and it's a curiosity rather than me asking you to do some work. At the People Committee, we get information about assaults on police officers. We believe, or we're informed, tend to happen when at that custody period. So I don't know if there's ever any work been done on correlating injury to people in custody with injury to officers or not. In terms of the prevention and professionalism work, which I think is really interesting and helpful, do you have an aspiration or a trajectory to see a reduction in complaints as a consequence of that? And then finally, it's quite easy to make a complaint about Police Scotland, but I'm wondering if there's been progress in making it easier to make a compliment about the service that people receive from Police Scotland, so that we can gather information on that as well. I'm not in any way suggesting that means it's okay that we've got the complaints, but actually it enriches your view about public perception, and it gives helpful feedback to officers and staff about their interaction with the public. And I also like the new report, easy to read. Obviously, as we go forwards, I'm sure there'll be improved processes, but I very much welcome that. Thank you for all the work in that space.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Alan, please.
Yeah, I'll kick off a couple of comments, and then I'll pass over to Kat, who'll provide a little bit more detail. Again, one of the challenges we've got in our current database has been able to draw out some of the diverse information that we would want to draw on, not only in terms of the profile of the complainer, but the profile of the officer who's complained about. So, for example, is there a negative impact on officers from an ethnic minority background versus others? So that's something very, very closely we will want to look at. It's something we've also discussed with colleagues at PERC in an aspiration to be able to draw and hold better data in that space. So I think if there's an ask there, Fiona, there is probably some potential for us to have a closer look at the nature of some of those complaints. It might be aligned to the commentary that was at the board last week, and we could probably, in waiting for those systems updates, take an action to review that and bring something back to the next committee. In relation to assaults on officers, that detail is gathered in quite a few places, and it'll not come as a surprise that whilst on occasion a member of the public may be injured at the point of being arrested, so too are officers, and that unfortunately is an all too frequent occurrence. It is picked up through our RIDDER assessment within health and safety, certainly in the work that we do in the health and safety, and that's where we're scrutinising and analysing data around assaults to officers, and then we're taking that back into the forums around your safety matters. So it has been scrutinised in other places, and also looking at instances where the same officer may be the subject of assault on more than one occasion. There is absolutely no definitive correlation between an injury to a member of the public and an assault on an officer, but as you will have seen in some of those forums, the number of officers who are injured or assaulted is and continues to be alarmingly high, albeit that has settled a little bit. So we are looking at that through a number of forums. Certainly within Police Scotland, it sits better in other places, but if there's something more specific you want here, we can look at that. Your final question was about compliments. I guess where we're trying to draw that data is from the user satisfaction and confidence surveys, where we're engaging with probably about 1,000 people a month or 1,200 people a month, and trying to draw on their experiences. And within there are some positive elements. But you're right, very often when people do receive an acceptable or a good service, that's just part of the norm, and only in those instances when somebody's really unhappy to raise a complaint. So it's always happy probably to strike the balance between complaints and compliments, if you like. But we certainly try to capture that through our confidence and user satisfaction surveys. I did take a note of your third question, and I've got complaints-conduct. I just can't remember what you asked me.
It was when we would, with all of the work that's going in, there's a lot of work going in. Not going to hold you to it, but there's always, big organisation, there are always going to be problems, always going to be challenges. There's no question about that. But actually, do we think that there will be a reduction in complaints about the professional conduct of police officers, particularly around the gross misconduct sphere in terms of domestic violence, misogyny?
So I think that's quite separate from complaints, and I think separating that out, I think even in the first couple of months of this financial year, we've seen a little bit of increase in complaints, but I think that's just complaints more generally from members of the public. I think your question is much more about
right. Sorry, no, I do
apologise. The conduct space. And our aspiration would be yes, but I think we've been working really hard to demonstrate and give individuals the confidence to report and the knowledge that we'll do the right thing, we'll take the right course of action. We're pushing really hard for people not to turn a blind eye, not to be that silent bystander. So I think hopefully we will. The time of when we achieve that position, I'm just not sure about. Also recognising the conduct space, a large proportion of matters that we deal with in conduct are off-duty related and not on duty. So I think it'd be really difficult at this point, and probably in this financial year, given the kind of focus it's on the integrity of the organisation. I think it would be hard to predict, but I think what we will try to do as part of our report, present the data in a way in which you can see the trend, and hopefully at some point we'd like to see a downward trajectory. If you're okay, Chair, I was going to pause and maybe let Kat just add a couple of comments to this, because she's probably a little bit closer to some of this than me.
Of course, please.
Thank you. Thanks, ACC. I was just going to add just a wee bit further reassurance just round about our ability or capability to capture the positive feedback as well. That is something that we are trying to focus on just now as well. There's a chief inspector within our support and service delivery arm who's progressing that just now and working with IT to refresh our website to make that more possible to capture. We're also benchmarking the approach around this from other forces as well in an effort to inform and develop that picture. So I hope that helps to satisfy your question, Fiona.
That's really helpful, Alan. And Alan, I absolutely take your point. Apologies for bringing conduct into the complaint sphere, but I completely understand that I certainly at the moment there's a bit of ambiguity about, are we capturing all of the issues? So I completely accept what you're saying about over the coming months and year we may well see an increase, but it's about capturing that data, using it and moving forward. So I completely accept that we're perhaps in the inquiring phase of all of this rather than getting to the end of it. Thanks, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really helpful discussion. Grant, please.
Thank you very much. I also very much welcome the presentation and the report. I think that's extremely helpful. And what I was wondering was how this is going to flow into our annual report, because one of the comments that has been made about the form of our annual report is it's got a lot of words, but a better, more focus on graphical presentation would be extremely helpful. So I wondered if you had any thoughts at this stage about how the all this information taken on an annual basis will flow into this year's annual report on the the activities of the department.
Sorry. No, thank you for that, Grant. So just double check my understanding. You're referring to the annual report for the complaints
For the authority.
For the authority.
The published authority. In our annual report and accounts, we have a whole section on every aspect of what happens, and I just wondered how this could what the thoughts of Alan Spears and others would be as to how this will flow into what we're going to see in this year's annual report and accounts.
So I meet Grant with the team quarterly in advance of the Police Scotland report, and as you know, complaints and conduct in part form a small part of that report. I think it's within our gift to work with the team to present the information as an informative manner as we can. So I think I can, if the detail that we're presenting the same data to you today, but in a different way, and if this is a positive thing, then I can work with the team to try and incorporate some of that into the annual report. I'm confident we can do that.
That's great, because I think it's very positive, and I think a diagram can save 1,000 words, if you like, but actually have more impact. And I think you could actually stress the positive bits in this very clearly. So I'd certainly welcome that. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. Paul, please. Yeah.
Yeah, I've just got a quick question. On page 5, it's chart 6, and I should know this, and I feel ridiculous asking this, but can I ask, the non-reasonable complaint handling reviews that have found the 25.8% of cases not handled reasonably at frontline resolution, are they ones that the general public have been content with the outcome of, or or have they been escalated? Or am I misreading that chart?
So those complaints, Paul, these are the instances where our final letter would say in the last paragraph, if you're dissatisfied with the way in which Police Scotland have handled your complaint, you can go to PARC. So these are instances where complainants have been dissatisfied. They've went to PARC. PARC have conducted a complaint handling review. They've made a number of recommendations back to us, and we've taken them on board. So we will still take these complaints to a point of satisfaction, but it's with a PARC intervention and so probably a couple of recommendations.
Yeah, it hasn't been resolved at frontline. I'm sorry, I've misread the legend there. So thanks very much. Sorry for that.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Okay. Do colleagues have got any further questions? No. Okay. Well, just a few from me as well. So as I kind of said at the start, I certainly very much appreciate, as colleagues have said, the graphical representation, because I do find it much easier to digest and kind of see trends and kind of salient points. I think, I think one of the things, and I do think as we continue using it, we'll probably identify some further improvement opportunities in this, as well as with any piece of management information. This is incredibly helpful. Just a couple of thoughts as we're going through my head. It's I think we did talk in the past around kind of presenting I suppose what I'm trying to kind of understand, and we can do that work in the background again with our officers, is just to make sure that as we're presenting this data, that we kind of haven't lost any of the detail that we might be required to kind of have in the report, just to make sure that we're not kind of reversing some of the recommendations that have come out from the independent review, etc. So again, I haven't necessarily done that audit, on this particular report, but if there's any expectations around the level of granularity, for example, about specific allegation types over, time trends and things like that, then I think, but that's, again, I think that's probably something that our team kind of can have a look at, and just because I think this is much more accessible from a challenge and assurance perspective, but just in case there are any more detail that should be present in the reports, to make sure we stay on the right side of what we need, to demonstrate. I think that's probably something that we can do. So you know what, and again, and I probably started talking about this since I kind of joined the committee. So for example, the complaints received on slide 3, complaints received by command area, where you can see the north, the east and the west. And again, obviously we can see the high volumes in the west, and I think just from a reference point perspective, what might be really useful out of interest is what's the number of police officers that are kind of, are within those areas. And again, I assume that obviously, in the West, it will be a larger number, or population, by head of population. So I think just those kind of reference points might just be quite helpful to see what are the ratios, police officers to complaints, because the areas are very different, and there's different kind of factors that might be used from a reference perspective, just to put the overall scale into perspective. But yeah, incredibly helpful. I did have another question actually just around the PERC referrals, so which I also think is really helpful to see it laid out graphically. And what kind of did strike me is that chart 8, where it says the statutory referrals by decision type, and then we've got sort of how many we've got under no investigation by PERC versus which ones have been investigated, and that's quite, there's obviously quite a big proportion have not been investigated. And I'm also really interested in some of the timings as well on this. So because, presumably when something is referred to PERC, and I know we can probably discuss that in some of our further items down in the agenda, but just at this stage, I mean, maybe Alan, if you've got a view as to how long does it take to get that decision around, is it going to be investigated, is it not going to be investigated? Because again, I presume that there is an impact on Police Scotland from where a decision is passed into PERC, and then we're waiting for something to come back. So I was just wondering if you can maybe talk a little bit about if there is anything on timelines, and if there's anything on the impact on Police Scotland from that kind of process. And I'm really happy to bring in colleagues from PERC as well, who are obviously on the call as well.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine, and hopefully what I say will not be odds with Phil's view. So in the first instance, the decision as to whether PERC are going to investigate is taken fairly quickly, which is a positive thing. I think there's a bit of an effort on our part sometimes to pull together all the relevant material. That takes us back to the debate about getting everything there within 14 days. So it is a laborious task for us organisationally to coordinate that and give PERC enough detail. But I would equally say that there's always an impact on officers in the knowledge that they can be the subject of referrals to PERC and potentially investigations thereafter. I think where there's potentially a bigger impact for our officers and staff is those instances where it's Article 3 and Article 5 referrals to PERC, and those numbers are really high. And I know that was only introduced through legislation in the last 18 months or so, but the timescales associated with that are a little bit slower. This is probably where we have to think about the deployment of officers if they are subject of those types of allegations. So, Phil might want to make a comment on that. On the whole, with the serious injury or the likes following police contact, then PERC are pretty slick in actually receiving them, engaging with us and taking a course of action. But it wouldn't be fair for me to make all the comments, so probably Phil might want to add something.
Of course, thank you, Alan. Sorry, Phil, I'll bring you in a second. So this is just to clarify my understanding. So are the Article 5 and Article 3 referrals in that chart 8, or is that separate numbers? Or am I just getting my wires crossed?
No, we've kept that separate, Katerina, because I think these referrals here are ones that are of great concern, and I think if we added the Article 3, Article 5, and I think in the financial year there was something like about 375 Article 3, Article 5 referrals, I think it would completely confuse and skew the presentation of this data, so we've kept that separate.
Understood. But that's not an insubstantial number, I suppose, of cases as well. Understood. Phil, thank you.
Yeah, good morning, Chair, morning, members. From a PERC perspective, and it is important that we draw the distinction between these kind of standard statutory referrals coming from the police and the Article 3 and 5. Going forward into next year, we won't report the Article 3 and 5 after a review of our performance data. These are, as Alan spoke about earlier on, subject of a statutory instruction from the Crown. Therefore, they are Crown-directed criminal allegation, which obviously the Crown have primacy over. In all these cases that come in, whether it is a taser referral, a firearms presentation, I think when myself and the Commissioner presented the annual report to all the members at the full board meeting, we made the point round about the use of body-worn video, and we are great advocates of that, purely from the point of view that our assessment can be conducted very swiftly, which aids all parties concerned, whether it's an injured person, whether it's the police officers that are involved, or just providing that reassurance that the PIRC have considered the full facts and circumstances. In the vast majority of the cases that we get, and certainly the serious injuries, quite a lot of them, as Alan Spears has said, happen within a custody setting. So our first point of contact is round about that CCTV, best evidence capture, and so on and so forth. And we are in a position to very quickly give decisions back to Police Scotland as to whether or not we're going to promote their referral to an actual full investigation. In terms of Article 3 and 5, I don't think, in terms of the transition, these things are always quite rocky. In terms of the PIRC, we have gone through a period of transition, taking on, as Alan said, 375 extra referrals in the course of a year, which is, really significant in terms of doubling our casework. So we've had to change and adapt our structures. There's an internal review ongoing just now in terms of our assessment unit, so that we can turn the decisions where the assessment unit go through in detail each of these criminal allegations under the statutory instruction from the Crown to consider whether or no there is a requirement to conduct a full investigation under that instruction. We are well aware that it causes pressure for officers involved in these things, because there is an element of an allegation hanging over them during the course of that. We are expediting them. We've reduced the backlog. I think we're just now sitting at about 45 or thereby that we have in a backlog. Hopefully within the next coming weeks, once that report is produced and provided to the Commissioner with the recommendations, then we'll be able to streamline even more the process that we've adopted to this point. But certainly the takeaway from the PIRC is, when we are getting these cases in, we do look at them very quickly, and if there is significant areas of concern, then they'll be expedited as quickly as possible.
That's really helpful, Phil. Thank you so much for providing that extra level of clarity around this. And so particularly full sympathy for accepting such an additional kind of workload. And I think what you were saying there around that kind of relatively quick assessment, again, this was a question, so just around, is there a possibility to triage almost some of them, because obviously there will be, again, there will be a scale of seriousness, of allegation of seriousness, etc. So, which just sounds exactly what you're doing. You're on mute, Phil.
Sorry, you think I'd learn after this period of time? No, I mean, when if for instance, if it's a variety of different high level, high tariff things are coming in from the police, we've got a team of very experienced investigators. They know that these things need to be escalated, and it's almost within the day we're going back to the head of PSD or to the ACC with letters informing them of the notification of the investigation. I suppose it's the lower level tariff, high volume, but there's still complaints at the back of them that we need to just make sure that we've got a positive process in place whereby we can escalate it and take decisions ultimately which are based on properly informed decisions from all the information that's being provided by the police.
Okay. Thank you for that. Okay, Paul, you still got your hand up. Is it a legacy hand? Legacy hand. Okay. Right. If there is no other further questions or comments on this particular agenda item, I think we are ready to move on. Now, I understand Darren is having technical difficulties. So rather than taking the SPA annual and quarterly report, could we maybe go to agenda item 5, which is the PERC annual and quarterly report on Police Scotland handling of complaints and investigation referrals? And it's Ilya who's presenting the report for discussion. Is that correct? I know I'm obviously trying to move things in the agenda now, so I don't know if Ilya is ready to do agenda item 5. Colette,
Is there any possibility that Phil could give Ilya a nudge?
I am nudging.
Thank you.
Okay, if Ilya's supposed to be doing 5 and 6, do you want to go on to item 7 with the Assistant Chief Constable Alan Spears, and that's the Police Scotland vetting overview?
Yeah, I mean, if Darren's not online and Ilya is lulled in a false sense of security, thinking he isn't coming up for a wee while longer, I suggest he probably just makes sense.
Yeah, no, he's not. He's not. He isn't in the meeting just now. So yeah,
Okay,
I think that's our only option at the moment.
Okay, of course we will. What was that? No, I thought.
No.
Okay, that's fine. Alan, are you okay to go to item 7 then?
Yeah, grateful for my colleagues not being here, just to leave me straight to 7. Yes, I am. So this is a report in our pre-meet, Chair, that you had asked for us just to present a bit of an overview and an approach around vetting. So it is pretty much a general paper, and obviously vetting integrity within police forces across the UK and how that impacts on public trust and confidence is incredibly topical. So in the first instance, the purpose of this paper is just to present that overview. So I will just draw a couple of headlines from this, and again, probably between myself and Kat, we'd be happy just to take 1 or 2 questions on that. So you'll see in the background to the paper at 1.3, we have a range of different vetting levels that we adopt within Police Scotland, which is akin to every other force in the UK. And that is predicated on the level of vetting application in detail that we're looking at. What you'll see in that part is that the number of vetting applications that we work through over the course of the year are incredibly high. So over 6,000 vetting applications have been completed in the past 12 months, and that's at various levels. So that will absolutely include every new recruit, every new member of police staff, every additional level of enhanced vetting, which requires annual checks. We vet every contractor who takes on a Police Scotland contract to a certain value. Big proportion of this is service providers, so any services within our buildings where staff are requiring access, whether it's construction workers, it's your cleaning staff or your estate staff, everybody is vetted. So there are no instances where we would take any shortcuts around vetting. So that makes it really busy. Over the course of the year, we've been able to enhance the vetting function. So we recruited a significant number of additional staff, and that was to try and ensure that we could maintain the service level that the organisation will require. Because as you might expect, and on occasions, people won't sit waiting and holding on to an acceptance of a job offer if the vetting process is going to take quite a period of time. In addition to that, we've been working towards how do we enhance the level that we carry out in relation to vetting, and we've done that around probationary constables. So, for example, the first thing they will do on their first day is they will get the opportunity to update their vetting forms. So we call that a vetting reaffirmation. So has anything changed since you were vetted? Tell us now. And in effect, we will review that prior to them taking the oath of office, which happens on a weekly basis. So, for example, we had an intake of new recruits commenced with us on Monday. They've done their reaffirmation vetting. since Monday, and the oath of office is actually taking place this morning as we speak. And unfortunately, there'll be an instance of a recruit not going to participate in that service because of changes within their vetting. So that should offer both the committee and the public a fair degree of reassurance in that space. We're also working towards looking at other options we could do, and we're in consultation with the staff associations now around the introduction of a randomised revetting programme, which would see a larger proportion of people revetted on a more regular basis. And whilst the Chief fully supports that position, we're working with staff associations and trade unions around what exactly that would look like. We've also, I think, hopefully from an HMI perspective, been fully engaged in the work that HMI are doing at the start of their culture review. And the first thing that they're looking at is that sort of vetting process. So we just await the findings from their review. And then towards the end of the report, there's a couple of case study elements in and around next steps. Maybe just quickly pause, because Kat's been leading on this on my behalf. And if there's anything, Kat, you think I've missed in terms of verbal update, welcome any additions.
No, I think the only thing I would say is we obviously started the recruitment sort of at the tail end of last year. Our vetting manager has worked really hard to bring together a bespoke training programme. So we're now actually starting to see the benefit of that uplift and getting these vetting officers up to speed, which, you know, are really welcoming it and as the gateway to allowing us to add in additional measures to safeguard the public and the organisation. So other than that, I think the ACC has covered things. Excellent. Thank you so much for that, both of you, and thank you so much for bringing this report forward. Absolutely. I think it's incredibly important, I think, for us to be very, very clear about what vetting is, what it isn't, what it can do, what it can do, what it can control and what it can't control, you know, and what other controls might sit in a space where vetting maybe doesn't control some of the risks, because, you know, it is such a critical thing for Police Scotland, for public confidence, etc. But you know, I think what some people understand under vetting is may well differ. So I think this is why this paper is quite helpful, and I'll let colleagues come in first, because I know, as I say, there's a wealth of questions that colleagues have, and then I've got a few as well, but I'll hold off until the end. Thank you. So Katrina, please.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for this. I think what you just said, following on from what Katerina just said there, actually in terms of what vetting is and what vetting isn't, and in relation to item 2.6 of your report, where you talk about you're taking on board improvements and recommendations arising from the HMIC FRS inspection into vetting conduct and misogyny. And given, and I know I've raised this before, given that large amounts of behaviour such as, you know, violence against women, domestic abuse, that kind of, you know, racism, you know, racist behaviours and attitudes don't really often lead to criminal records. So I guess I'm curious about how the vetting process kind of meshes with the overall recruitment process. Other aspects of recruitment. I raised this issue with Chief Constable at a board meeting a couple of months ago, but, you know, especially given his statement last week, I think we have to take on board that we're not always going to prevent certain people that bring Police Scotland into disrepute, despite all its good work in these areas. So I guess that's what my question is around how are you going to merge the vetting process with other aspects of the recruitment process in order to try and ensure that new officers, probationary officers, understand absolutely what is expected of them when they join the police force.
I think Katrina will come on to a paper that Kat will introduce, actually item 8 on the agenda, which will talk about the preventions and professionalism programme, and in that regard, vetting is only one element of the activity that we would undertake. So I probably don't want to steal the thunder, particularly from her paper, but you also make a really valid point in that vetting isn't a single solution. We probably, particularly with recruitment vetting, probably about 30% of vetting applications that we receive don't meet the standard. So I know that's not contained particularly within the paper, but for us this week to get 195 new recruits through the building, we've probably vetted about 260 or 270 individuals who are looking to come into the organisation. So it's a starting point, but I think Katrina in her paper will be able to outline a range of other activities that were undertaken, and vetting would, in my mind, would only be one element of that.
Thank you. That's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Katrina. Thank you. Fiona, please.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for that report, Alan. I'm interested in people who essentially fail vetting by protected characteristic. I wonder if you have that figure, and also are you going to review your vetting process in the light of the Chief's statement on institutionalised discrimination?
So I don't have a broader breakdown of figures to hand, Fiona. I mean, what I would say though, in terms of our broader approach to vetting, we are vetting to a UK standard. The approach that we take in Scotland is very similar to the approaches that's adopted across the UK, but we are continually part of this exercise looking at, are we getting all the right information, and are there unintended consequences based on the applicant? So we are scrutinising some of that activity, and because we've seen a large proportion of instances where people would fail vetting, we're scrutinising them in detail. What I would say is, again, to give you some reassurance, the red flags that would result in a failure of vetting are generally fairly significant, and they're probably not borne out of the characteristics of the applicant. As significant matters around criminality, criminal associations, or really significant financial issues. So, but in terms of the specifics data, I don't have that to hand.
I think it would be helpful in slower order to see that at the committee. I'm asking the same at People Committee in terms of the health vetting, and so I completely understand it's a kind of UK standard, but actually, if we're stepping up and saying, there is a structural inequality element in our decision making, I think it would be helpful just to refresh and to check and make sure that we're not excluding specific groups of the community. So again, I think Alan, Kat, in slower order, I think it would be helpful to see that data presented, and also to understand the feedback that's given to applicants who fail with a consequential, actually, you're a good candidate, you failed in this, if you do this, then we'll welcome you.
Thank you very much for that, Fiona. No, that's an excellent point, Fiona. And what was just that kind of triggered the thought around whether or not there are equality impact assessments for some of our broader policies that we have within the space, because ultimately that would be certainly a control to control for any kind of unconscious bias within how we approach certain things. So again, don't expect you to know that just now, but it would be good to see if there are impact assessments on our processes that we have for some of our really key standard operating procedures. I see Maggie just put her hand up. I don't know, Maggie, if that's something. Do you want to comment specifically on this point?
It's just apologies, I'm not in the quietest place at the moment, so apologies if there's background noise, but it was just to point out that the IRG in their paper that they presented at the board indicated that they were going to look at vetting, and my guess is it's through the lens of protected characteristics.
Mm-hmm.
And also, just whilst I'm on, it's just to sort of confirm what Alan says, we've been given access to everything in relation to vetting, and it's the HMI's decision that we will publish a separate paper on vetting, and that will come out prior to the organisational culture paper, and it's likely to be around August that the vetting paper will be published. But as you're all aware, there's a number of processes to go before the paper's actually published. So a briefing, obviously, to the force and for factual accuracy checks before then, but it's likely to be August.
Yeah. Excellent, Maggie. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your contribution. I mean, really, really excellent point about the IRG. So that should absolutely, their work within the space should absolutely help to provide us with assurance that we need around impact assessments, etc. And really welcome HMI's work within the space, because again, that will give us that independent level of assurance that you know will be incredibly beneficial to our activity. So looking forward to that, but you know, appreciate August. Hopefully we'll hit you. Hopefully you will hit. Hopefully everything will be on track. So maybe by the time we've got our next committee, it may or may not be out. But in any case, it will be within. It will be very. It's imminent, so to say. Not too long to go until August. Okay, so that's really helpful. Apologies. I know, Grant, you've been very patient.
Thanks very much. In fact, one of the questions I was going to ask was in relation to the IRG, so comments last week, so that actually ticks off one of the boxes. I just wonder if you could say a little bit more about para 3.4 and the continuous integrity screening that was announced in, I know it's only a few months ago, in January 2023, but I wondered what impact that's having on not only the workload and time of this of the vetting process, but how the final sentence says this work is currently ongoing, and I just wanted to be sure that this is something that's really embedded going forward and not just a one-off exercise. So if a little bit of clarity into how that's fitting in would be helpful. Thank you.
Chair, again, with your indulgence, I'm quite content to provide Grant an update, but I feel at this point in time it needs to be probably in the private session, just given the challenges we've got in working with NPCC and also ensuring that I'm briefing it to the Chief Constable and others in the organisation. So I can note that and come back to that if that's okay, the introduction of my conduct paper.
Yes, that's absolutely fine. Thank you.
No, thank you for the question, Grant, and thank you, Alan. I appreciate that they are very, very closely linked in the of our minds, but it makes sense, I think, you know, for the reasons that Alan's outlined, to take it separately. So thank you for your forbearance for that, Grant. Paul.
Yeah, also on 3.4, can I ask what formal consultation have taken place with particularly the staff trade unions, who are distinctly different in terms of contract law from police officers, employment law rather?
Yeah, so where we are just now, Paul, on one hand, we have got the Chief's approval to look at some of the approaches that we want to take, and right now we're in that space of consulting with both the staff associations and the trade unions, and that consultation hasn't finished. And I guess how we lead and progress this will be driven a little bit by that level of consultation. In terms of the work that we've done around the integrity screening exercise, there is an obligation contractually for officers and staff that where they are the subject of a criminal conviction, a criminal investigation, they have an obligation to notify the organisation. And I think when I talk later about the data, the integrity screening exercise is to give, in the first instance, the Chief Constable an assurance that what we think we know, and that's why the work around that exercise is on the Police National Database. But we are engaged at this point with the staff associations, and probably in a couple of places working just at a slightly different pace based on that consultation.
Shouldn't that consultation have taken place before the announcement that it was going to happen? Otherwise, what are you consulting on?
Well, I think understand the point you're making, but at times we've got to get the chief's approval before we can even start the consultation, and it would be, you know, it wouldn't be right to consult. The continuous integrity screening activity across the UK came at an absolute pace, and there's an absolute desire, and we're confident in the footing that we're in. We have said that we would commence some of this work from April. And some of that work is at different stages in the process.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you'll be pushing an open door, but it's important that we maintain good relations with staff associations and unions. So it would be, I think, I personally would value, you know, enhanced engagement with them in order to try and get this across the line and not upset them.
No, I fully agree and understand that, and I would suggest that that's the level of consultation we're having with them just now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Fiona.
I'd just like to support Paul's perspective on this, and I think, you know, we considered the Fair Work paper yesterday at People Committee, and I think increasingly we need to make sure whatever we have is enriched by working with our formal staff partners and moving forwards. And I know that the director of P&D is looking at, you know, the JCNC and the new form of recognition agreement, and I think that should make things quite clear about how we go forwards. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely. I think that is a really valid message. So thank you for flagging that. Okay, are there any other questions from colleagues? No, okay. Well, as I say, I really welcome this paper, and I actually for once found I found the case studies really helpful as well, because I think they just illustrate a little bit more to the uninitiated as to what does vetting actually involve, and what type of information is potentially being looked at, and what type of decisions the officers who are doing the vetting, the staff who are doing the vetting need to make. So I do find that really helpful. And I know we are going to be talking about the relation between vetting and the wider recruitment as part of agenda item 8. So I'm kind of going to hold, you know, some of the questions for that. But, you know, and apologies if I'm maybe laboring something that is very obvious to people. But I always find it useful to think, you know, in terms of the processes and activities that we do, in terms of they are controls to mitigate certain risks. So they will, by design, they will have certain strengths and certain limitations. And if I kind of summarize this, you know, what I'm taking from this paper, setting out the different kind of vetting arrangements, is that well, certainly at the moment, when somebody comes in, there is the recruitment vetting. That vetting is primarily against known data sources, but it will not cover things that aren't kind of, you know, in some databases. I think the case studies are really helpful in illustrating that social media is something that is being looked at as well. So that's really helpful. So it's not just kind of criminal databases, but it's broader publicly available sources as well. I see Kat nodding, so that's helpful. So I'm obviously on the right path there. But you know, but it will have those limitations exactly that Katrina has already touched on, which we will explore a little bit more under a different agenda item. And then, you know, and I suppose then the challenge remains that once an individual is inside the organization, how do we keep that knowledge up to date? And I know we will touch on the continuous integrity screening progress of that within our private session for reasons that Alan has outlined. But you know, but I think this is a really important question for the organization. We know what we know at the start, and that's seemingly robust. Once an individual is within, how do we stay on top of that? You know, because obviously, although they have got an obligation to report something to us, that's not to say that people will do that. So it's what are the mechanisms, what are the controls within the organization to stay on top of that? And you know, and then, you know, we do appreciate that obviously vetting is an intrusive and labor intensive process. So what is the appropriate level of that continuous kind of vetting activity, because everything kind of comes at a cost, and we are in a time of really constricted of resources are diminishing, but at the same time the importance of that ongoing, staying on top of what happens to our officers and staff over the course of employment is incredibly important, for all the obvious, topics that we have already discussed. So it's kind of finding that balance, and I'm, really hoping that some of the discussion around item 8, and when we come into the continuous integrity screen, this will help us close kind of that, these are all the different puzzles, and they all need to work together, because without that, we're either certain that at the start of the employment everything is good, but what happens afterwards? And so we just kind of need to, I suppose, really make sure that that puzzle picture is complete in our minds, and we know exactly what is the level of control that is being applied, not just at the start but also throughout the employment. So apologies for this kind of monologue, but I think this is a really important first part of the puzzle, but I think we will need to continue refining our understanding and seeking that assurance as to how complete is our picture at any given point of time, in terms of where we feel our officers and staff are, when it comes to their behavior and their attitudes, etc. So thank you for indulging me. Okay, I hear that our colleagues who have been having technical difficulties are back online with us. So we will do a little bit of a jumping back. That's going to give Alan and Kat a little bit of a breather before we delve into the further agenda items. So I would suggest, Darren, if you are with us, that we go back from the important topic of vetting onto the really important topic of the SP annual and quarterly report. So please, would you take us through that?
Thank you, Chair, and apologies for the technical difficulties. So I'll take the paper as read and just provide a kind of high-level summary. In performance terms, this is our usual, I suppose, short-term trend 8-quarter view, supplemented with an annual report in terms of longer-term year-on-year trends. So in terms of the short-term 8-quarter view, really we've been seeing a consistent trend in terms of relevant complaint and allegation volumes until Q2 of the last financial year, since when we've had no complaints received. Over the broader piece, the majority of the relevant complaints received have related to senior officers, although recognising that volumes remain very low. The nature of complaints received, the vast majority are around about on-duty complaints, with a small minority relating to dissatisfaction with quality of service. Linked to earlier conversation you've heard this morning around frontline resolution within Police Scotland, we use the term early stage resolution, which has continued to be an effective means of addressing complaints of a less serious nature. 28% of the allegations have been resolved over the period concerned. From a timescale perspective, of the 13 which have been closed over the last 2 years, only 3 were completed beyond the 40 working day target, and you'll appreciate that when these have arisen, we've provided explanation around about that, typically due to complexity involved, and there are no relevant complaints which remain ongoing as at the end of Q4. From a longer term perspective, over the 4-year piece, which we will extend out going forward, the reason for a 4-year view this time is because of a change in our reporting approach. So it will provide a longer term view still going forward. But again, in the context of a low number of relevant complaints and allegations received generally, we have those seen a gradual decline over the period, with a steep drop in 22-23. Complaints in respect of senior officers have remained broadly steady until last year, when there were none received. And in terms of complaints about the authority, including forensic services, from a high in 2019-20, we now have minimal numbers being received. On-duty allegations have been broadly steady until last year, when there was just the one. And in terms of quality of service, from a high in 19-20, there's been a steady decline until none being received last year. Timescales wise, significant improvements from an earlier high of 96 average working days in 2017-18. That's reduced over time to a low of 14 last year. And the number of complaints that have been closed over 40 working days has reduced similarly over the period, with none closed over that period in the last year. Just a couple of quick updates. Otherwise, in terms of our dip sampling approach, just to confirm that we have been in discussion with Police Scotland since our last committee, and we're in agreement that they're in agreement for us to resume our business as usual dip sampling activity. Anything of a thematic nature would be for wider discussion beyond this point, but the business as usual is resuming. National Complaint Handling Development Group, apologies I missed at the end of the Police Scotland reports that may have been covered already, is reconvening next week, which is positive. Our own team benchmarking exercises are progressing, and we would hope to provide some briefing in that space going forward. Only other things to advise, the Dame Ailish Angelini Thematic Progress report, the most recent one, was published in May, and my key focus from this committee, now that we have the range of annual reports provided, is to progress work on our committee annual report for last year, and probably in shorter order the statement that will be included in the SPA annual report and accounts in terms of the committee's assessment of the suitability of Police Scotland complaint handling arrangements. So I'll be in touch with you in due course, drawing together the data that's been provided from today's meeting. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Darren. That was worth waiting for. So thank you for that. Very comprehensive and easy to digest update. So thank you for that. Are there any questions for Darren at this stage? No, it's very... Oh, Fiona, please.
Just one, and I suspect that there is an answer to it. Darren, well, there's two, there's any learning, so organisational learning from this, but when I'm looking at upheld, not upheld, there is a very small percentage or a small number of upheld, but the narrative talks about 56% of allegations not upheld. Now, I'm looking at the unacceptable persistent complainers, I'm looking at withdrawals. So are we saying of those that are looked at, half of them are upheld, or are we saying there is a number that's upheld or not upheld? So if we're saying 56% are not upheld, 44% arguably would be upheld. I'm just wondering, it's more about statistics. I'm thoughtful about its presentation. I'm not explaining that very well, and should we not be stripping out those that have been withdrawn, etc., before we then give the percentage of upheld, not upheld?
You okay for me to come back, Chair?
Of course, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Fiona. So on the first point around about organisational learning, you recall we did bring a report to the committee recently, which looked fundamentally at organisational learning, recognising we received small numbers of complaints. So what we brought earlier this year was our second report over a broader period, to be able to reflect about learning from both a process, a complaint handling perspective, but equally in terms of the content of complaints and any learning resulting from that. So I think from memory, you recall, that's led to some changes in terms of policies within forensic services, for example. So I can assure you that, proportionately recognising volumes of complaints, we will continue to bring organisational learning updates to the committee at an appropriate timescale. In terms of the data point, you're correct in the 56% is 56% of all allegations, where the remaining 44%, it's not the case that they were not upheld. That's a balance of those that were early stage resolution resolved or withdrawn, abandoned, etc. I appreciate the point in terms of presentation of data, and I'm absolutely happy to go back and reflect on that.
That's great. Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Darren.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fiona. No, that's really good observation. So keeping you on your toes, Darren, which is very good. Fabulous. Thank you for that. Okay, so I hope Ilya is with us as well. So we can hopefully cover item 5, which is the PERC annual and quarterly report, please. Ilya, over to you.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, committee. Apologies for not being available earlier, just having a little bit of technical issues. So this morning I'll present the Q4 update report from the PERC in relation to complaint handling reviews, and my colleague, Mr. Chapman, will speak to the second part of the report in relation to the statutory referrals from Police Scotland. I'll perhaps highlight some headlines from our update report. You will see that during this financial year, we received 254 CHR applications in relation to complaints handled by Police Scotland. Overall, when we look at the quarterly comparison, you will see that in Q3 and Q4, there was a very substantial increase in the number of the applications received. Generally speaking, it is a trend that is a little bit familiar to ourselves from previous years. However, we've looked at the applications in more detail, and you will see that a significant proportion of those additional or increase in the applications related to complaints that were subject to non-investigation provisions by the Professional Standards Department. Generally speaking, those non-investigation provisions were introduced during a revision of the statutory guidance, and I think it would be fair to say that they were not perhaps utilised to its potential. That was recognised by the Professional Standards Department, and I think a concerted effort has been made to increase the utilisation of those provisions. In general terms, I think the average number of the applications we receive on annual basis is approximately 270. So we received 254, slight decrease in the number of the applications. But as you will see in terms of the remainder of the report, the number of the individual complaint allegations per CHR application has increased quite significantly. In terms of the timescales for provision of the paperwork for complaint handling reviews, you will note that in Q4 there has been notable improvement in terms of the time awaited to receive additional information during the complaint handling review. That time has reduced to 14 days. The initial receipt of papers timescales remained relatively steady. In Q4, it's 10 days. So in cumulo, you will see that in Q4, 24 days or 0.8 of a month timescale, which is a quite significant improvement. We provided an annual comparison. And you can see that whilst the initial receipt of papers timescales remained relatively steady over the last 3 years, the timescales for provision of additional information during the complaint handling review gradually has decreased from 37 days 2 years ago to 19 days on average this year. And the overall timescales have reduced from 47 days to 30 days. So again, over the last 3 years, I think we can see that the timescales have reduced by 36%, and that's naturally pleasing to see, and something that we were expecting to see with the introduction of the new complaint handling model in May 21. We provided a quarterly breakdown of the number of the CHRs, CHR reports produced, and the number of the heads of complaint reviewed. You will see a quarterly comparison again. Notably, the number of individual heads of complaint gradually has increased. And that is evident quite significantly in the annual comparison on page 6 of the report, where you'll see that although the number of the CHR reports has decreased slightly from 210 to 201, the number of the individual heads of complaint reviewed increased from 813 to 946. I think generally speaking, we see that the number of individual allegations has increased from just under 4 allegations per CHR to just under 5 allegations per CHR over the last couple of years. So again, in terms of trying to ascertain the reason behind it, we suggest that perhaps the efficiency of the NCARO unit in terms of resolution of low-level complaints that usually contain very low number of individual allegations, combined with just an overall general increase in the complexity of the matters that members of the public are complaining about, and thereafter Police Scotland handling those complaints, and the matters thereafter escalated to PERC. In terms of our assessment of Police Scotland's handling of the complaints, you will see that in Q4, 77% of all complaints reviewed were handled to a reasonable standard, which again is a positive indicator. We have provided a breakdown by region. You will see there are again some regional variances, but again you can see that, for example, some areas are managing to achieve 88 and 83% in terms of reasonably handled. So again, if we can try to get that consistency throughout regions, we can, I'm sure, improve even further. But as Mr. Spears highlighted in his report, the annual figure for the complaints handled to reasonable standards has increased to 74%. Again, that's the highest percentage that I think Police Scotland has ever received in terms of the PERC's assessment. So again, that's a gradual improvement over the last 3-4 years, which again is a positive development. We have provided a more detailed breakdown of the outcomes by quarter. You'll see that specifically in terms of Q4, there was an increase in the number of learning points issued to Police Scotland. Again, the most significant increase related to the utilisation of the non-investigation provisions in relation to low-level complaints. We made 225 recommendations, and you will see we've advised on the current implementation rates for those. There is a small number of the reconsideration directions issued this year, and the number of learning points has decreased when you look at the annual figures on page 8. This year, primarily, our learning points were focused on individual learning rather than organisational. So those will be learning points identified in relation to the handling of the specific complaints rather than more organisational learning points in terms of process or procedures. In terms of the recommendations, you will see that we've provided a quarterly breakdown and the annual breakdown on pages 9 and 10 of the report. Broadly speaking, I think it is relatively consistent in terms of the biggest categories. I think over the last few years remain the recommendations in relation to the sufficiency of the complaint inquiry, the quality of the final response, and the recording of the complaints. So those three categories dominate the overall number of the recommendations, and you'll see that in terms of the annual figures, and again comparing it to previous years, those three categories remain primarily the main categories, and in cumulative probably amount to about 80% of all the recommendations made. We provided an update in general in terms of our engagement with the Professional Standards Department, and as Darren indicated, we have been in discussions in terms of resurrecting the National Complaint Handling Development Group. So naturally, we're looking forward to being involved in that once again, and I'm sure that group will be a very useful platform for all the stakeholders involved. So I'll pause at this stage, and I'm happy either to take the chair questions at this stage, or if you would like to perhaps move on to the second part of the report, I'll pass the stage to my colleague, Mr. Chapman.
I'm on mute. I'm off mute now. Thank you very much, Ilya, for this. Do members have got any questions? Again, as you know, it's always very comprehensive, so thank you for talking us through the report. If nobody's got any questions, I just have got one, and it's probably a slightly broader question, Ilya, because you know there's a lot of data, and you're very, very close to this. If I was going to ask you what, in terms of what the data tells you, and obviously your intimate knowledge with it, what is your opinion as to what is currently the biggest area of improvement that Police Scotland can make in their complaints handling process?
If I may, I probably have two. I would say. I think there is one of the areas that I think it's something that is highlighted in our audit report, which I will speak to later on, and I think it's something that we're already trying to address, is really just to increase the level of training and inputs that we can provide to the complaint handlers within the Professional Standards Department. I think we did a lot of good work 2 years ago when the new complaint handling model was put in place, and I think we organised a number of very good training inputs. Unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, we haven't done as many training inputs, and I think over a period of time you can see an element of inconsistency, perhaps creeping in with various regions, perhaps with maybe additional new staff coming into Professional Standards Department. And one of the recommendations in our audit is about to try to standardise the level of training that everybody receives. So we're working on this with the Professional Standards Department. We have inputs organised. There's one happening next week. Again, with the review team from the park delivering a presentation on the non-investigation provision, an issue that has obviously came to the forefront of our mind when we're looking at the recommendations and the type of the CHR applications that we're receiving. I think the second issue that is perhaps an issue that I'm hoping we can address in the year going forward is really about the timescales and the communication with the complainers, because I think in those it's understandable that not all complaints can be conducted within the 56 days as we hope. A lot of those complaint inquiries can be complex. There may be issues about, tracing witnesses or getting accounts from the witnesses. And it's really just about being more effective in terms of communicating and updating the complainers, making sure that if there are delays, that the complainer are fully advised of it. And that's really an area where I'm hoping to kind of try to engage with Professional Standards Department and see where we can improve that aspect.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for that. Yes, I say, because we can have a look at data all we want, but actually, I'm really interested in that editorial from you because you're closer to it than anybody else. So it's really helpful to have that, succinctly kind of, articulated. So, I mean, I would really welcome a comment from Police Scotland as well at some stage around the training, so kind of the training observations, because absolutely, take a point. Yeah, we do have the report further down the line now. The report was obviously, I'm not banging on about this, but it's it was a wee while ago that the field work took place, so there's been a bit of a delay. So I would have hoped that there would have been some kind of developments within the training space, but we can explore that as well. So really appreciate that, and I'll bring Police Scotland in a second. But on your second point, that has actually prompted another thought that I had, which at some stage I would like to explore in this forum, which all complaints are incredibly important because members of the public taking their time out to submit something to communicate to us, to communicate to Police Scotland. So incredibly important. But as with every communication that we receive, with everything in life, there is a range of seriousness. Let's put it this way. What's really important for some will be less important for other people, which is quite natural. But when it comes to what we see in terms of timelines, we see averages. So we don't necessarily see the ones that take longer are there on the more serious side of the spectrum, which if we can use kind of some objective measures like criminal allegations or just what I think ordinary members of the public, if we polled 100 people, would say, yeah, that's definitely more on the serious side of a concern versus okay, that's possibly more of an inconvenience, still important because it is still a really valuable point of feedback, but possibly less. So, and at some stage, whether it's at this stage or I would really like to understand a little bit more about that kind of internal, I don't know if triaging is the right word, but what happens on the Police Scotland side, because again, I know we've touched on the issue of resources. And I would just like, to have assurance that in the world where we acknowledge that if we had all the money and all the people in the world, we would probably want to cover every single concern, within the timeframes, but where we can't, how can we make it visible what happens behind the scenes in Police Scotland to make sure that the complaints that are on the more serious side of the spectrum are prioritized? So I appreciate it might be more difficult to make that visible, but I would really appreciate if we could have that conversation because, again, logic tells me and conversations tell me that there is work that happens to that effect. But I think, from assurance purposes, I would quite like to make that more visible because that's an integral part of a complaints handling process. And, for us, it's really important to know that if complaints are increasing, resources are decreasing for whatever reasons, that we do focus on the ones that are more serious. So I see Leah nodding. I think maybe a good time at this stage to pass over to Police Scotland and see what response they have to some of these musings.
So thanks, Kat. I'll maybe make a comment on the latter and maybe ask Katrina just to comment on the training. I think first and foremost, we're not any different from PERC. Phil and I would both love to have more resources to do things a lot quicker. What I would say in terms of the function within PSD, the demands within PSD across the UK and professional standard departments has never been greater. And the people we've got are working incredibly hard. And at times the demand across the board is always outweighing the availability of staff. So I think I'm not confident the timescales we can change that significantly in the short to medium term. What we are working hard to do is to make the efficiency of the complaint handling process as effective as we possibly can. So even in the frontline resolutions, complainants are getting automatic notifications that we've got their complaint. We'll speak to them, and that process starts really quickly. There are some instances, as you've outlined, where some complaints just take quite a significant period of time. So there's a proportion of our complaints have got criminal elements to them as well as non-criminal, and it's always our aspiration to work with Crown Office to resolve or handle the criminal complaints and then pick up the non-criminal complaints So there'll be a range of complaints that will probably at times feel as though it's skewing that average time scale. So that's maybe something that we can have a look at. But I'm acutely aware about the demands on the department, the availability of resources. I probably need to say anything more to the board members about the discussions we've had in recent times about reconfiguring police numbers and then police staff numbers, and that unfortunately is impacting my business area as much as it is others. I've been able and fortunate to maintain the numbers that I have. So we are working hard in this space. And Kat will probably give you some assurance about the work that we're doing in and around training. So I'll pause, maybe come to Kat, and I'm happy to take any questions from there.
Thanks, ACC. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, we're entirely on board with the points Celia has made round about the training provision. We are regularly bringing in an influx of staff, including complaint handlers. So by and large, that their induction training would be a 4-day event where they've got a whistle-stop tour of the department, a day on Centurion, which is our complaint handling database as well. We're currently working with Park to devise a 1-day joint training event as well, which will be to good effect. And we've also brought in previously an external company just to give further insight, really helpful advice and direction round about difficult conversations, importance of communication, etc. So the feedback from the complaint handlers on the back of that was really, really strong. So there's plans in place to bring that company in again and work with us again in September and also in February 2024.
On mute again. Thank you very much for that, Kat and Alan. I really appreciate these updates. And I think, you know, on the point that Alan was making, that, as I say, in an ideal world, if we had all the resources, but I think what is important is, you know, Police Scotland are very good in other parts of the business around risk-based, you know, risk-based approaches. That it's a dynamic risk assessment. And I think when it comes to complaints, it probably is not dissimilar, but from an assurance perspective, I would really try and help highlight that, you know, as part of the data that we see, that actually, you know, despite all the process and procedures that we have in place to, you know, to enable that, you know, fast response, etc., some things will inevitably take longer. So how do we make sure that there is a risk-based approach that's wrapped around that, so that something that is serious, you know, isn't taking longer than necessary with, you know, within the prescribed process. So I, you know, would really welcome some further thinking and conversation on that. Okay. Thank you everybody for this. I see Phil is ready, and thank you very much, Phil. Over to you.
Yeah, I'll just take you through the investigations paper. I won't rehearse the figures, they're there to be read. I will provide some context around about the quarterly comparison increase that the PIRC have experienced from Police Scotland referrals. Alan Spears stole my thunder earlier on in relation to what that looks like in terms of the serious injuries following police contact, firearms presentations, tasers, and deployments, and PAVA use. We sought to understand the particular reasons behind that from Police Scotland. We're just working our way through the response and the narrative to that, just so that we can give some assurances round about that, both to yourselves and through our reporting mechanisms. Beyond that are the referrals that we have deemed that are necessary to conduct a full investigation, and there's no particular patterns or trends to report to the committee in terms of what the recommendations are. Obviously, the recommendations just now are sitting at 88% implementation since 2013, which is a good figure. It fluctuates month by month, as you can imagine, and in the last quarter we had 4 recommendations which were made round about custody matters. We, as I said earlier on in my remarks, commenced the investigation assessment unit review, just for us to pause and reflect on our internal processes for the assessment of investigation decisions in relation to Article 3 matters. Hopefully that will allow us to make sense of what has been a very hectic 18 months since we took on the responsibility for that, so that we can just make sure that we're as effective as we can be at providing timeliest decisions, but also obviously decisions that have to be accurate in consultation with the Crown. In terms of partnership working, Katrina mentioned it earlier on, Julio spoke about it as well, some good collaboration between Police Scotland and the Park ongoing. The liaison event that we've spoken about previously, we're looking to establish another one later on in the year, again to build on some of what I think is quite a good success just in terms of opening lines of communication and trying to aid and assist the police service and their learning from the work that we are carrying out. That would be broadly my comments, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Phil, for the update. Are there any questions from members? The stage, no. And again, I know, Phil, I mean, you have touched on this, but again, just for clarity, based on what you have seen, because again, it's the annual thing, so we've got an annual set of data, and we have, as you know, as I mentioned, we've kind of seen sort of some of the increases, etc. But based on your assessment, has there been anything in last year's data to indicate that there is something out of the ordinary, a worrying trend? I mean, is there anything where you would want to kind of specifically pull out over and above what you've just covered?
No, I think the firearms presentation Alan spoke about earlier on is something that we're trying to work to understand, because it is in effect, if the police point a weapon, then ultimately it is a referral to us. So we're very keen to understand and just make sure that we keep a constant refreshed eye on that as an organisation, just to give the public that assurance that the discharge of the necessity and proportionality of the police use of firearms is being met. We are working our way through that with the police, just to understand that. We haven't come to a concluded view on it, but as and when we do, we will report it back if there are any concerns around about that.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Okay, no further questions. I would like to give everybody a comfort break. I do apologise if we've been going for so long without a comfort break. So can I maybe suggest 5 minutes, if that's enough to boil the kettle? So roughly back by 12:20, and then we'll be straight into agenda item 6. So Ilya, stay online. Okay, we'll see you very soon. See you in 5 minutes. inevitably be some stragglers, but I suggest that in the interest of time, we kick off. So agenda item 6, the PERG Joint Audit Report. Ilya, over to you. Do you want to please take it as read? We have been through it, but very keen again to have your introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. As you know, this audit materialised on the following the DML review, specifically recommendation 42, which recommended the PERG undertake an audit of the initial triage of the relevant complaints. Specifically, the audit looked at the initial receipt, recording and assessment of the complaints by the National Complaint Assessment and Resolution Unit, who are tasked with that specific function. I'll perhaps highlight certain key findings and the relevant recommendations that we've made, and thereafter, if the committee have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Firstly, I think it would be appropriate to thank the members of the SPA complaints team for their support and assistance during this audit, and also our colleagues within the Professional Standards Department for facilitating the audit, and again providing us with the assistance and all the necessary information. Naturally, without that information, that assistance and cooperation, the audit wouldn't be as fulsome as it is. In terms of key findings, firstly, you'll see that we found a very dedicated and committed staff within the NCARO, who quite often had to adapt to the new complaint handling system within a short time scale. And we found that there has been perhaps inconsistency in terms of the level of training that the NCARO staff have received since commencing their role. The targets for initial contact with the complainers, in our view, are quite ambitious against the a number of staff within the NCARO team against the number, the significant volume of complaints that they have to deal with. So in that regard, you'll see from the report that I think the target of contacting the complainers within 3 days was met only in 22% of the cases. So to that effect, we made the recommendation 2, to review the timescales for acknowledging receipt of a complaint and making the initial contact. In our view, those 2 aspects of the complaint process could be separated, and I think whilst it is important to acknowledge the complaints within a very short period of time, we think that perhaps there may be a merit to review the timescales for initial contact with the complainer in order to try to resolve their complaint thereafter. In addition, in relation to this finding, we've also made a recommendation to make a more standard training program provided to the NCARO staff when they commence work within that unit, and that's within the recommendations 3. And you can see a little bit more detail on this issue on pages 14 and 16 of the report. Overall, 80% of the complaints that we've examined were either resolved by the frontline resolution or abandoned or withdrawn. So in total, that comes to 80%. Again, as the report highlighted, it is very encouraging to see a good resolution rate of the low-level complaints, but naturally 26% or a quarter of the complaints being withdrawn or abandoned is an issue that perhaps could be looked at in a little bit more detail. And related to this, you will see that the report looked at the utilization of the 14-day abandonment letter, and we found that there has been some inconsistencies in terms of its application. In that regard, we made recommendation 5, to provide guidance on appropriate timescale to issue a 14-day abandonment letter, and also provide further clarity in terms of what constitutes all reasonable efforts to secure a complainer's cooperation. You will see from the report that there was quite significant difference in terms of the level of contact or attempted contact afforded in different cases before a decision was made to issue the abandonment letter. Again, some further information on this could be found on pages 19 to 23. Of the 64 complaint files that we determined that were not suitable for frontline resolution, frontline resolution was attempted in 38 of them, and the report has acknowledged that in certain circumstances it was successful. Nonetheless, you'll appreciate that in terms of our statutory guidance, certain complaints that allege significant failings or perhaps relate to potential breaches of human rights, certainly in our view, are not suitable for frontline resolution. However, further, you will see that from the 181 CO files, so that's complaint files where there are relevant complaints, and those that are being progressed through the complaint process. 44 of those, or 24%, contained missed or combined complaints. So again, that's an issue about recording of individual complaint allegations. So in 37 of those out of 44, we identified missed complaints. So ultimately, it's where a number of individual allegations are made by the complainer during their initial contact, but only some of those allegations are identified as relevant complaints and recorded thereafter. So we made, again, recommendation 3, I think very relevant in terms of providing standard training to the NCARO staff, and also recommendation 4, to develop guidance on the classification of complaints with practical examples of distinct categories, including providing more clarity in terms of what constitutes assault and what is an excessive force. Again, there is some additional detail in the report on pages 16 and 18. Throughout the report, I think one issue that has been quite significant, and that's in relation to incomplete records within the files. A lot of these issues have been identified in the MI files, which ordinarily are raised when the allegation is deemed not to be a relevant complaint. And that may relate to whether it is the level of contact with the complainer. It may be in terms of the actual assessment, why the matter is deemed not to be a relevant complaint, and so on. There are instances where you appreciate that there may be repeated complaints raised by the same individuals, which are very appropriately will be designated an MI file. However, that rationale for that decision making for a decision not to progress it as a CO file in many instances was missing. So from that perspective, you will see that recommendation 6 of the report again proposes that PERC, together with the SPA and our colleagues in the Professional Standards Department, work together to try to review and revise the existing complaint handling form to make it more user-friendly. There has been some issues identified with the difficulties with the form, and that's something that, again, has been highlighted through our discussion with the NCARO staff in terms of the form being slightly awkward in terms of not being necessarily user-friendly. Again, you'll find more information about these issues on pages 23 to 26. Recommendation 8 also looked to try to address the issues we've identified by proposing a revision of the MI assessment sheet to ensure that it captures the necessary information to support the rationale for decision making. In other words, a decision not to progress a complaint as a relevant complaint. In addition, you'll see that we've identified some deficiencies in terms of recording certain important information about individual complainers in terms of certain protected characteristic, vulnerabilities, or individual needs of the complainers that are relevant to the handling of the complaint, or how Police Scotland communicates and engages with the complainer. So again, you'll see recommendation 1 is specifically designed to try to address that issue, so that when the complainers make the initial contact and those issues are identified, that those issues are properly recorded, and thereafter, as a complaint progresses through the complaint process, the individuals who are assigned the complaint for progression are fully aware of any issues that have been highlighted by the member of the public, the complainer, at the early stages. We examined the miscellaneous files in detail, and you will see that in terms of our report, there has been a significant increase in the number of MI files raised following the introduction of the new complaint model. We assessed that there has been an approximate 44% increase in the number of MI files raised. Generally, following our assessment, we assessed that 36% of the MI files actually contained a relevant complaint that has not been recognised or assessed as such. And in our view, that demonstrated in many instances lack of understanding in terms of what constitutes relevant complaints. But more significantly, you will see that in 29% of those files, the complaints have been assessed as not being competent rather than the statutory test of being relevant. So again, we have designed a further recommendation 7, which we hope would address that issue, to develop a training module that will include specific guidance on what constitutes relevant complaints. So again, a more detailed discussion of these issues can be found on pages 23 to 32 in the report. And again, related to that, the information captured within the MI assessment sheet, in our view, could be enhanced to make it more user-friendly, provide a better audit trail of the assessment, decision-making, the rationale for not recording complaints as relevant complaints. And to that effect, we designed recommendation 8, which again looks at the MI assessment sheet to make sure that it is more effective in terms of capturing the relevant data. As I mentioned, recommendation 1 is focused primarily on trying to capture that additional information about the complainer, any additional needs or individual vulnerabilities that should be taken into consideration, either in relation to the complaint itself or the complaint handling and engaging with the complainer. You'll see that I think in 36 cases, or 20% of the cases that we've examined, those issues were relevant, and in our view, I think, given that kind of proportion, that we need to make sure that that data is captured. But you will also see that throughout the report, we have tried to capture some good positive examples where Police Scotland have taken those issues on board in terms of how they've communicated with complainers, making the reasonable adjustments in terms of again, communication, the mode of engagement, whether it's personal meetings, whether it's through the representatives, and so on. So there certainly have been examples of good practice in that regard, but I think it's probably an area where we could potentially strengthen. So I'll pause maybe at this stage, and I'll invite any questions on the report from the committee.
Thank you very much, Ilya. Whilst members are gathering their thoughts, I see, Alan, you would like to come in.
Yeah, thanks very much, and I appreciate the work that was done by PERC in this audit, and from a Police Scotland perspective, totally accept the detail that's contained within. However, for the benefit of board members, I have to highlight this is 2 years old and doesn't reflect any of the changes that we made in the summer of 21. And whilst we will review the recommendations, the complaint handling model has dramatically changed, which Elaine will know, but it's 2 years out of date. And I'm just conscious that I would want to take any learning that's relevant, but I just caveat what is an enormous amount of time from the audit to this report coming out, and we've moved on quite significantly.
Thank you very much for that, Alan. And I mean, it's a really valid point, which I'm glad you've made, and which I would have made otherwise. I was really interested to kind of get your assessment as to which of these recommendations you feel you've made substantial progress towards already. So, but this is an audit is always a snapshot of a situation at a point in time. And I think what I would like to add to this as well is that I can't help observing that it's before, so I could see why it was done when it was done. But I also note, it's 3 months pre the new complaint handling model going live, then 3 months after. But actually, in my experience, when you're introducing a new operating model, particularly within something like complaints handling, 3 months after the go live isn't really a particularly reliable time period either. It's because it takes just that while in terms of snagging, bedding in, etc., continuous improvement. So I think it's incredibly valuable as a snapshot in time, and I think it does give us some really kind of good kind of thinking. But yeah, totally hear what you're saying. Right. Do you want to come back in, or Alan, or is it a legacy hand? Is there something I've said that's triggered? No. Okay, good. Fabulous. In that case, Fiona, please.
So I'm really pleased to hear that from Alan, because I actually was quite disconcerted when I saw this. So if Angelina was saying she needs to have that audit carried out for assurance, the question I had in my head is, does this actually give us assurance that the percentages were quite high, 36% in one section. The complaint wasn't recognised, a significant number, in my mind, not suitable for frontline resolution. So I'm grateful for that clarification. So the next question I have is, when is it going to be repeated? So that we can actually look at it anew. And the other aspect is we hear feedback from staff that when the grievance procedure is raised, it's almost treated like this burden of proof is almost like a criminal investigation. So I'm interested in the upheld, not upheld aspect of complaints that are made, in terms of, is it an on balance burden of proof, upheld, not upheld, or what standard of evidence is needed for it to be upheld? So essentially, when's it going to be repeated, and that burden of evidence and proof.
Thank you for. I assume the question is for myself rather than Alan. Yes, in terms of the when is this audit going to be repeated? I think probably premature for me to maybe speculate when. In the first instance, we will await feedback from Police Scotland in terms of how we will now progress the recommendations, and we will liaise with our colleagues within the Professional Standards Department, make sure that we make good progress in that regard. And thereafter, I think it would be fair to say that we anticipate that we will have a follow-up to examine how things have improved since this audit. You'll appreciate that in terms of the MLH recommendations, there are other recommendations in terms of the audit, in terms of what specific areas that we should focus in terms of audit. So I think we're in the process of developing an audit program which will look at a little bit further ahead. but certainly you will be aware, I think recommendation 7 has further suggestion about PERC undertaking audits of frontline resolution in the 6-stage process. So I think in the first instance, we will continue to liaise with the Professional Standards Department to make sure these recommendations are implemented and we make sufficient improvement and progress. We will look at other outstanding recommendations from the Daniels report, and thereafter we will consider obviously repeating that kind of audit on a relatively regular basis. But I think naturally we need to take into consideration the work that the SBA are doing in terms of your own dip sampling as well, because and the HMICS and ourselves, and try to obviously coordinate those matters slightly to make sure we don't overburden Professional Standards Department with external scrutiny. But in relation to your second question, complaints about police are determined on balance of probabilities tests, so a civil standard of proof, and the standard operating procedure on complaints about the police and our statutory guidance provides a little bit of guidance in terms of how the test should be applied. So again, there are various provisions, but ultimately the balance of probabilities test is widely known. I think the CAPSOP provisions are such that if, for example, the evidence is equally balanced on either side, then the complaint would not be upheld. So, certainly, if it is not, if the material facts are not in dispute, and it's really a complaint about the standards of service that is received, and it's not so much a balance of probabilities, but more a professional assessment by a suitably qualified officer, whether in their professional opinion the standard of service provided was reasonable. So yeah, so that's how the non-criminal complaints about police are determined.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Ilya. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you for that. Grant, please.
Thanks, Katrina. Ilya, I was also going to comment that I was very surprised when I read the report about the timeline between doing the work and reporting. And I wonder if you could say a little bit more. Was this due to difficulties in agreeing the recommendations or the findings? And it would be quite helpful to understand if that was the background to the long delay between doing the work and reporting. Because flowing through to the, as Fiona has already asked, about when it will be done again, I would like to find a way of, could there be a shorter time window between doing our follow-up review and reporting? Because clearly, as it was very helpful to get Alan Spear's comments about, things have moved on so much over that period. It's really better to try and find a way of shortening the time window between doing the work or follow-up work and reporting, so that there's actually some better flow through to adopting and implementing recommendations. So I wonder if you could say a little bit about what the reason for the delay in reporting would be, so we've got a better understanding of that, please.
Yeah, sure. Grant, I think we'll have to acknowledge that there has been a delay in terms of the issuing of the report. We didn't go into any specific details, but I think you'll appreciate, similar to the point made by Mr. Spears, in terms of resources available to us, there are obviously certain limitations, and naturally you will appreciate that complaint handling reviews are a primary statutory function, that we have to ensure that we find that balance between ensuring that our complaint handling reviews are not delayed unnecessarily, but also undertaking that wider assurance work. So in terms of the delay, the main factor was a human factor in terms of just health issues perhaps in the team members that unfortunately unforeseen and delayed the completion of the report. Once that happened, unfortunately, we tried to reallocate resources to maintain the progress on the report, but ultimately the delay is something that we were unable to avoid on this occasion. But I think brought in a kind of more wider concept, you will be aware that for a number of years, PERC did not undertake audits, and I think this was probably our first audit for maybe 4 years from my memory. So in that regard, I can assure you that a lot of lessons have been learned during this audit. I think it was a very valuable experience for our staff. I'm sure our colleagues in PSD and our colleagues in the SBA complaints team, I think a lot of lessons will be learned to ensure that going forward we have that resilience and closing that gap between the examination of the files and the preparation of the report. I think, generally speaking, I take on board the time lapse since the period that we've examined and until now. It will be interesting to see in due course what improvements have already been done, and there is some reflection of that in the report in terms of the update that was provided to us by the Professional Standards Department in December of last year. I can see that some changes, some improvements were made over that period. Obviously, whether those are sufficient, we'll see. I can tell you that in the last 2 weeks, I've dealt with at least 2 reports that still refer to competence in terms of assessment of complaints rather than the statutory test of relevancy. So I'm not convinced that everything highlighted in the report has been resolved. I accept the time gap there. And again, if Police Scotland have already addressed certain issues that we've identified there, that's only a positive development.
Right, thank you very much. I understand that this was a bit of one-off circumstances here coming together, but I think actually if we could say perhaps plan ahead to a follow-up that touches on what has already been implemented and what still needs to be done, I think we'd all find that quite helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Grant. And yeah, Katrina, you've been very patient.
No, not at all. Thanks, Chair. I suppose, yes, following up a number of comments. I mean, like Fiona said, very pleased to hear the assurances around what's progressed since the work was done on this report, and because some of it is quite uncomfortable reading, really. And not surprisingly, of course, some of what's jumped out at me is the area around protected characteristics and vulnerable people, and so slight a sort of clarification, I suppose, would be around if 1 in 5 of the people within the cohort that you looked at have protected characteristics, that's 1 in 5 people who've disclosed that they have protected characteristics, or where it might be absolutely obvious. So it could be a higher figure, really, couldn't it?
Yes.
So I guess again, particularly in regards to the recent announcement by the Chief Constable and looking at issues of equality, diversity, inclusion, human rights, and all the work about vulnerable, working with people with vulnerable communities and all that. I suppose what I'm really asking for, especially in terms of what Grant has just said, that it would, so this is really a question to Police Scotland, I suppose, is more about, I would like to hear more around the training aspects of this, that people understand when they're working with people with protected characteristics. I would like to see, so I'd like some assurances about what kind of additional training is being put in place, and what kind of understanding there is around what reasonable accommodations and adjustments can be made to a complainant who has a specific characteristic. So, for example, I think one case was given of someone who has arthritis and struggles to use a keyboard, but there was no evidence that anything had been put in place to support that complainant. And I think particularly, again, it won't be any surprise to anybody, and I feel I have to say it, where some of the, the disabilities or the so-called hidden disabilities involve communication differences, and sometimes that can be challenging for people on both sides of a conversation. I would like some assurance around what kind of levels of understanding are being raised around those areas. And finally, to go back to Fiona's point about good examples, good practice, and you have mentioned those, I think they're so important because they actually flag out what is possible. This is possible. It's not that difficult. This is what good practice looks like. So again, I really welcome that aspect of things. I think that's really all I wanted to say. I suppose it's not really directly a question. It's really a question around assurances going forwards that I'd be hoping for. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katrina. Really valuable feedback, musings, just in this, I suppose, reactions, exactly. So really helpful to hear that. And just in terms of kind of sorry, and I'll bring Paul in a second, but what was just going through my head. So in terms of, I understand the next step is there will be a Police Scotland response to the recommendations, I understand, and then so I think these recommendations will be treated like PERC recommendations generally are treated, right? So you just said that, yeah, this is the first one that's been done in a number of years in terms of an audit perspective. But there are governance structures around some of this. And actually, what I just need to check with my learned colleagues from an audit and risk perspective, if we're going to be treating that, if we're going to be sort of, if that's going to go through our audit and risk committee in terms of the closure of these recommendations, which I think it will be. So that's an additional level of assurance for us as well that when police come forward and say, well, actually we've addressed this and this and this, and this is the evidence that that can follow that route. That's my understanding at the moment. Okay, I don't know, Katrina, I see you've come online, but I'm not sure, Katrina Henderson, I mean, but I'm not sure if you need to comment. I'm not necessarily expecting a comment or confirmation now. So I think we're good. Is that okay, Katrina Stewart? Yeah, okay, fabulous. Thank you. Paul?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much in the same theme. This is, I mean, it's 2 years old. It's far from ideal. But I mean, it's a snapshot of what things were like 2 years ago. What I'm interested in as a non-exec is assurances. How do we get assurances that things have got better? And if they haven't got better, what hasn't got better and what we're going to do about it? Just saying it's 2 years old, it's out of date, doesn't dismiss it. It just makes it more difficult for us to nail down exactly where we are at the moment. It's not quite nailing jelly to a wall, but it does the longevity does make that give us a little bit more difficulty, but we still have to find a way of doing that. So I'd be interested in seeing the Police Scotland response when it comes up, because hopefully, in terms of the best principles of self-evaluation, hopefully there'll be a good demonstration of self-knowledge there.
For one of the future sessions that we at least get to see a paper of some sort. So we've got the assurance, but as I say, in addition, it will be the audit and risk route as well, that I think, should there be anything that kind of remains in terms of any extra activity, that will be monitored through that as well. Okay, well, if there is no further questions or comments on this, I would like to thank PERC and everybody indeed who's been involved from an SPA perspective and from a Police Scotland perspective. So thank you very much for making this audit report possible. And this enables us to move swiftly on into agenda item 8, which is the professional boundaries update.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just going to hand straight to Katrina. She's been doing the work on this. In the interest of time, she'll just draw one or two highlights from the paper. Thank you.
Thanks, ACC. Thank you, Chair. As we have previously updated, the committee, Police Scotland, commissioned a review of complaints and conduct matters which did contain sexual circumstances between January 2017 and October 2021, just to ensure that our organisation had discharged its responsibilities. So by way of update and follow-up in terms of that work that was done, we do continue to push forward and make strong ground round about the professional boundaries and sexual misconduct subject. Of the 19 recommendations that emerged from the 2021 PSD case review, 15 are complete. There are 3 that are currently in progress, and there is 1 that's been considered under the PSD Preventions and Professionalism Tactical Board. So those 19 are all outlined within an appendix that was supplemented to the report for your further information. So in addition to support that work, as you're aware, PSD and Police Scotland have committed to a 1-year calendar of activity focusing on our 10 standards of professional behaviour to re-educate and raise awareness round about standards, the existence of those and the primacy and priority required to adhere to those both on and off duty. We are focusing 1 month across intranet messaging. Is supported by a graphics campaign, posters, etc. throughout the building and throughout the buildings in the estate and Police Scotland. And we're also giving face-to-face training updates and wherever possible as well. So in terms of that campaign, we are now at the 7th standard of orders and instructions, which was published in May of this year. Following on to that, the next move will be towards a likewise communication and educational messaging round about the 8th standard of confidentiality, and we aim to launch that in mid-June. And thereafter the 9th and 10th standards as well. We are currently working on developing a second phase for the campaign to focus on education and awareness round about officers and staff and how they should react and respond to instances when they see and hear inappropriate behaviour. And we're also going to look to revisit the strong messaging that we did circulate in terms of abuse of possession for a sexual purpose that was absolutely in accordance with the NPCC products and messaging south of the border as well. Over and above that, my colleague Superintendent Helen Harrison is on screen, and Helen and her team worked pretty hard to establish a quarterly internal publication round about misconduct outcomes, where we are redacting outcomes but communicating across the workforce in terms of gross misconduct outcomes where officers have either resigned or retired or dismissed as a result of that process. We published the first version of that on the 13th of April, and we are currently working to publish the second edition of that as well. That's been the subject of much discussion across the organisation, a lot of positive feedback, and the spirit of this is well recognised in terms of trying to encourage educational messaging as well as organisational learning across the workforce as well. We've also launched a PSD-driven newsletter called The Standard, which is front and centre on the internet and quite a bold message as well. That is aimed to communicate key themes and trends that's arising from complaints and conduct investigations across the workforce in an effort to try and prevent recurrence. Similar and further to the PSD case review round about sexual circumstances, we have now started and well on our way in terms of a similar review focusing on domestic abuse matters that have featured between the 1st of January 2020 and the 31st of January 2023. That's caused a review of 206 matters, and of which those we have currently referred 5 to our specialist colleagues within the Domestic Abuse Task Force to have a further review of the circumstances in the investigation and potentially revisit some of those if required. We continue, PSD key members continue to keep abreast of NPCC work as well. We have strong footprint on the relevant NPCC groups as well, where it gives us great opportunity to learn from others, harness best practice, and potentially use products that have been developed elsewhere to good effect and internally in Police Scotland as well. And it's a great opportunity just to benchmark ourselves against others too. We continue to actively support and encourage our officers and staff to raise any internal concerns through a range of internal reporting measures. And there's also broader work going on looking at the reporting measures that are in place and the mechanisms to see if we can advance that further within the organisation. That's a positional update in terms of the case review. Chair, if there's any questions, happy to assist.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Katrina, for this fulsome update. And you know, I think your verbal update reflects and just really highlights what's in the paper. So it's quite nice to have that sort of in addition to, rather than you know, it's just a subtraction. So thank you very much for that. I see, Katrina, you would like to come in.
Yes, thank you. And thanks, Katrina, for that. I mean, it's really clear there's a lot of activity going on in this area, which is really encouraging, and it's really good to hear. I think so. You talked about getting positive feedback on some of this, and you talked about, well, there are two different things. There's positive feedback. I guess the key question that's jumping out for me here is, you know, how are you going to identify and evaluate any impact of all this activity? Because there clearly is a lot of activity. So, but from a kind of assurance point of view, it'd be really good to know how you're going to measure what kind of impact all this activity is having, and then, you know, evaluate what you need to do next, for example. And I guess, so tagged on to that is that you said you're carrying out a review of the domestic abuse area. So you're looking at between 2020 and 2023. I think that's what you said. Yes. So again, I'd be really interested to know what the follow-up is going to be from that work. So that's it in a nutshell, really. It's like the positive feedback is great, but how do you actually, you know, really capture that and use it as evidence to impact, and then next steps going forwards? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so we are working with colleagues at other parts of the business across strategy and innovation to give us some support and assistance about devising a framework to measure success or otherwise of the campaign. So Colleen Wiley, that's on screen just now, and her team are leading on that as well. We've got a range of measures in place in terms of harnessing feedback through our engagement on a monthly basis with staff associations. So they obviously learn and hear from our workforce as well, Katrina. And also we are actively monitoring the reporting levels as well. I've said this before, we do see the increase in reporting as a positive. There's no doubt in my mind it's a direct impact as a direct result of our efforts internally, but also the efforts across the UK to raise awareness and encourage people to report, so to give us the opportunity to address these things. So this is the messaging that we are quite strongly putting out, and actually following up by really robust action, activity and investigations on the back of those reports. But yes, we are building a framework to measure the outcomes.
That's really helpful. Thank you. I mean, I think this question has been raised in the past as well. Is that, you know, it'd be interesting. So the increased reporting, you know, can definitely in context be seen as a positive thing. I suppose at some point you're going to want to see that plateauing out, and maybe that'll be one of the ways that you know that actually all this work is having a positive impact. But no, that's really interesting, and really look forward to hearing some of the outcomes from that work in terms of evaluating and your framework. So thank you very much. That's great. Thank
you. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that. Fiona, please.
Thanks, Catherine, and thanks, Kat, for that report and an update. It is very encouraging to see that taking forwards. The standard question I have in my mind now constantly is the work that was going on before the chief statement, and now post. Are you taking a different perspective, given that the chief had talked about institutionalised discrimination? in terms of this, particularly in terms of domestic abuse? Is there a different slant, a different perspective? And then just a comment, you know, it's great to see the positive feedback from, you know, from officers, but if it were easy for members of the public to put in a wee compliment, then there would be that feedback as well that can help encourage, you know, police officers to know that they're doing a good job, that they're appreciated, and you know, the bulk of officers are not behaving inappropriately. So that was two things: one, any change of perspective; two, just to egg you on to keep doing make it easy for a compliment.
Thank you, Fiona. So we are continually and actively looking for ways to improve and enhance what we're doing. I think we've made huge progress over the last couple of years, and we're continuing to be on that journey. There's no doubt on that in my mind that is the case and will continue to be the case. Katrina mentioned my hope, and I do remain very positive that we will start to see the instances tailing off. There's so much going on across the organisation from all different angles that should reap good effect, and I think already is. In terms of if we are doing anything differently, we have been changing our approach. We have been looking at different thresholds where we take action in terms of investigations. You know, broadly, we are inclusive in terms of our approach. We are learning and taking note of sort of reports south of the border following Baroness Casey's report, for example, in the Met. So we are clearly benchmarking ourselves and looking for opportunities to improve. But I think we have made significant changes, but we are continuing to make sure that we do that.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you both. Any questions? No, I mean, I suppose, you know, what I'm kind of reflecting on as well is obviously when we were talking about the vetting element earlier, we did, you know, the question was asked by Katrina about how does this complement? So what else? And I think it's quite clear how some of this will be complementing, very much complementing the vetting process. So that's that. So I appreciate recruitment is obviously, again, it's a different process, right? So it's a different process, it's a different department, but I'm just looking for the assurance that there is that really quite close working together.
So I can answer that, I hope, Chair. So yes, indeed, as part of the staffing uplift into the vetting unit that the ACC mentioned earlier, we saw that as a real opportunity to have actually created a base at Jackton of some vetting officers, which is where the bulk of the recruitment department sit, just to make sure that we've got that sort of hand-in-hand engagement. The feedback from both the head of recruitment and our vetting manager is that that's working to really good effect as well. Obviously, we do have sort of changes in approach proposed for the vetting process. You know, that's clearly supported by the recruitment background, reference checks, etc., done upon a point of application, and then we've got the further options round about the reaffirmation process as well, and we then have opportunities to address any shortcomings during a 2-year probationary period. If concerns regarding behaviour start to emerge that haven't come out, you know, we've already touched on sort of beliefs and things that won't necessarily hit onto police systems, but there are other mechanisms that we can look at if concerns continue to or start to emerge beyond recruitment and vetting processes.
That's excellent. Thank you very much for that update. I think that is very helpful, you know, and particularly as you say, this period of the probationary period, I suppose, is something that isn't necessarily present in other professions. To something, you know, to such, it's 2 years, isn't it? So yeah, just to such a length of time to kind of really get a better understanding of how somebody fits in with the values of the organization. So and that's quite important. Okay. That's great, right. So are there any further questions on this? Fabulous. Thank you so much for this update. It is always really encouraging to hear the amount of effort that's happening within the space, and it's encouraging to hear as well that there is work to try and capture some of that very important impact. So thank you for that. Okay, so moving swiftly on, and I see ACC Spears may be rejoining us from a mobile. So Okay, so we're moving on to item 9, which is the organizational learning. Now, I'm not sure who will be presenting that, and if Alan will be able to present that from a mobile, or if Katrina, if you're taking over.
Chair, if you would just indulge and we pass over to Superintendent Colleen Wiley, whose team have been doing the work. Thanks, Chair.
Of course. Welcome, Colleen, please.
Thanks, Chair, and good afternoon, committee. Hopefully you've had the chance to read the paper that's been submitted, providing a bit of further detail regarding what we're doing around about organisational learning, although I do take on board, I acknowledge the comments that were made at the start of the meeting just round about the depth of detail in that report, but hopefully the paper does provide detail on what we're currently doing and what we need to do to really have a greater focus on organisational learning and improvements right across the service, and importantly, how we actually, and I think Katrina touched on it in the last paper, how we actually monitor the impact and actually the improvements in that area and prevent repeated incidents that are coming to our attention. And as you'll note, the main report now includes a bit more information around about specific tangible sort of cases of where we've identified learning and tried to be as proactive as possible, linking in with different parts of the organisation, because certainly PSD will, it's right that we identify it, we capture it and we coordinate it, but it may well be for other parts of Police Scotland to deliver that learning and those improvements. So very much that's what the paper had tried to capture, and obviously the main report also gives that further information too. So not to rehearse the entire paper, but obviously our main routes for getting that learning are through well-established methods, from PERC investigations, Crown-directed investigations following death or serious injury, following police contact or whilst in custody, and the learning and recommendations from complaint handling reviews. So that's fairly well established. We've got our database which tracks and gives ownerships for those recommendations and the improvements and learning that's needed from that. Where we absolutely need to have a greater focus and build upon is the learning from complaint handling processes and misconduct cases as well. And that's certainly an area that we're looking to build upon and really have that proactive approach to identifying it and linking in with the various business areas to bring about those improvements. ACC Spears did touch on it earlier that we do have some challenges just round about our databases that we currently use, but we are absolutely hoping that the upgrades and improvements will allow us to, rather than manual trawls, that automated ability to really bring out those themes at an earlier stage and have those considered discussions about what's the most effective way to prevent those instances happening in the future. The report also captures elements of PSD learning, and Elliot also touched on that in his update. The specific concerns there was around about non-investigation. So while some of it is learning, a lot of it is down to training and updating and revising our processes and practices within PSD. So hopefully I've touched on it there. We also spoke earlier about, obviously, a huge part of learning improvements is our preventions programme, and really where we see repeated instances from conduct cases or complaints, that we're actually trying to get that awareness and educational message right across the organisation, and making sure it's reaching the right people as well through our various comms channel. And some of the instances I've shared in the paper are around about inappropriate behaviour and messaging through social media applications. So where we see that issue arising and that trend, we're really trying to be as proactive as possible and thinking of different ways where we can influence behaviours to prevent further measures. But absolutely, I think that the next step section captures, we need to build upon the particularly complaint and conduct matters. And really that's the update from myself, Chair, unless you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Colleen. I'm going to open that up to members first. So, and then again, thank you because I think your verbal update has provided some additional, detail and just helped to really illuminate some of the high level themes in the paper. Grant, please.
Thanks, Katrina. Colleen, thank you very much. I bet most people on this call will know I'm a great believer in learning from past mistakes and problems to go for continuous improvement. and therefore I would just encourage you to actually progress the continuous improvement element as rapidly as possible. But I do recognise that there are other people who have to engage in this process, whether they be from training or whatever other parts of the organisation. And I think the key thing is to try and find some sort of measures as to how effective the improvements are coming through, because it's so easy to say, oh yes, well this needs done and that needs done, but if it doesn't actually happen and it's not actually having the right impact, then we're not getting forward and making progress forward at the pace we would like to be. So to me, it's a question of moving forward at pace and assessing the effectiveness of the impact. So good luck.
No, absolutely, Grant. That principle is very much at the fore of our plans to upgrade it, because in our work on the upgrading the database intends to actually capture that. Well, actually, here's the themes. Let's monitor that going forward, and if we do have any repeat instances, do we need to adjust that messaging, our training, our policy to make sure that we have a robust process in place to address it? So thank you.
Absolutely, thank you.
Okay, no, that's fine. Thank you. I am just quite conscious that obviously when we were closing off our organizational learning action, that we wanted to discuss after we've discussed the item as to whether or not there was going to be something else that we would like to take forward in terms of this. I suppose so. I fully understand. What was I going to say? And Fiona, I'll bring you in a second. I understand what's kind of being expressed. So I do understand the direction of travel. What I suppose I'm trying to understand is how these changes, these really positive changes, are going to make it the way to our committee. So possibly how are we going to see the output of this activity? Sorry, Fiona, is that do you want to come in on that, or? So that's what I'm kind of trying to wrap my head around, because I understand exactly the direction of travel, and similar to Grant, I think it is absolutely necessary and absolutely important, but it's just how is this going to lead to increased assurance for us, because we do not want to lose the focus on organizational learning to some degree. But I appreciate it kind of starts straying away from purely a complaints and conduct committee into kind of all sorts of other areas, because you quite rightly said that some of the actions and then the learning is then taken forward somewhere else. So I suppose this is really encouraging. I'm just from an assurance perspective, again, I'm trying to wrap my head around it. So I don't know, Colleen, if you've got any ideas as to how you could make all of the good stuff visible to us once it's had time to embed and really produce the benefits that you're intending.
I suppose, subject to further discussion with AC Spears and Chief Superintendent Henderson, Chair, I would propose that the main report, we obviously build upon that section in the main report, particularly in terms of that monitoring impact and what we're doing to get to that place where we can give you those assurances that we have a governance process in place that maps that or identifies the impact and how we address where it maybe isn't working. If that sounds appropriate.
I think so. Fiona, would you like to come in on this?
I think my perspective is Scotland know that they need to do more work in terms of that analysis. They've given us and demonstrated where they derive that from, and they've committed to bringing back more detail and more information with more analysis to us as part of a routine report. I think Alan also talked about the new IT system. So the current system does not favourably allow analysis, but I think it was August and October, we're going to get upgrades. So we would expect to see in the future more evidence of both the analysis of the learning from complaints, but also whether or not there's recurring themes, so that we can then, as the months go on, we can assess the effectiveness of the impact of the actions that are being taken. So I was content. That's
Sounds
a long way-
excellent.
short way of
That sounds-
putting that. Yeah.
No, thank you so much for that. That's perfect. Okay, good. Okay, well, thank you very much for that. If there's no more comments from anybody on this, thank you very much, Colleen, for providing this update. Really appreciate that. Okay, which takes us to the Complaints and Conduct Committee work plan, which I think is relatively self-explanatory. So I wasn't proposing on going through it in any sort of high level of detail. I think it's for noting. So unless anybody's got any comments on it, I'm just gonna treat it as read and understood. Okay, so which I believe now takes us into our private session. I'm just seeing that the ACC Spears has been trying to dial into the meeting without success. So yeah, so what I would suggest then we do, because we do need ACC Spears for the private session, obviously. Shall we take a quick break, maybe,